Good morning, everybody, and thank you all for being here. And hope you brought your pocketbooks with you because we need to check out what you got. Might need some of it. As we go through the process, we'll address each one of these, and we'll have a presentation, and the council, I give the council an opportunity to respond. And occasionally, you'll see a council member leave to go upstairs and get some coffee. And I hope there's coffee been made up there. So we'll see how this works out. So appreciate you being here. I think it's one of the more serious parts of our responsibility is to set the tax rate so that, and the issues that we have regarding tax rates, because that's what makes the city runs is the money we get from that source. So let me open our special meeting, council meeting, Council City of Pearland for Saturday, August the 11th, 2018, and it is at least 8:30, which is the posted time. Purpose of the hearing, of course, is the listening to the staff responding to the issues of the budget, starting with new business item number 1, presentation regarding the fiscal year 2019 budget and multi-year financial plan budget workshop number 1, overview, highlights, general fund, debt service, and property tax. And first up is Clay Pearson.
Good morning, Mayor and Council, and thank you for being here and taking times away from your family to spend some Saturday morning with us, and also to the staff and community members that are here as well. As you said, Mayor, this is an important part of our annual responsibilities to review the recommended budget and get a running start on fiscal year. It starts October 1. A couple little housekeeping items additionally. We provided the budget to you, the recommended document to you a week and a half ago, so you've had at least a couple of nights opportunity to review that. We've got several sessions scheduled over the next 6 weeks or so, specifically, but this is our dedicated time that we can present the material to you and get your feedback and answer any questions and go from there. We did present the PowerPoints are in the packets at your places this morning, and we also are posting those up online. We also, as we do, will have the answers to any council questions that came in and document that and try to answer those for our level best. So I will get right into it if you don't mind, Mayor. Got a lot of slides and be talking at you, but wanted to start out first and foremost with a thanks to our staff. Those are the ones that are getting the work done for the community day in, day out. We've got a fantastic staff. Obviously, I know you all believe and know that and appreciate that. We work and every day, waking up, trying to think about how we can make Pearland community better, add value. We've got lots of partners in that endeavor. It's not just the city as an end to itself. And we work across all of our functions and levels and try to make it a cohesive whole that's delivering those services to you, such as with this shot of one of our active shooter trainings that brought together police and fire in this instance, and obviously backed up with dispatch and all the ancillary support functions that make a city run. So city government across the state of Texas comes down a lot to our value and the growth. That's what supports our property tax revenue side and also the debt service. And we did see growth in that as well, which is a good thing for everybody. Everybody wants to see their property values growing. It sure beats the alternative. It is a more moderate growth this year and of the entire tax base. So we had a couple of years in the past of pretty significant, some cases double-digit, which does get capped for individual homesteads, but double-digit growth. But that I'll show you a slide here in a second that sort of puts some meat on that to explain that. But this is all based on certified values from Brazoria and Fort Bend County. We will get Harris County and make adjustments in another 3 weeks when we get that. The largest picture of all is, as far as the general fund goes, our budget is balanced once again. Operating costs, even with revenue costs. Cautionary tale is that our fund balance is just it's just at the minimum. There's not any extra cushion in there right now. And the cost structure that we have does continue to grow as commodities and supplies grow, but more significantly in our circumstance, we're a people organization and the people are delivering the services. We need to support them, and we've done that in the last budget, and we'll continue to do that. And then we've added positions in a few cases, not so much in the general fund this year, but we've definitely added positions in the last several years, and those full costs are recognized in this upcoming budget. So on the general fund, it's a revenues and expenditures about $80.5 million. So we're a very complex, large enterprise, one of the largest employers in town, certainly, but we deliver a full service, municipal services. We're not a special district that just gets the luxury of looking at one function. We do multiple things every day for the community. And again, so that people piece, we've got a 2% cost of living adjustment across the board. Obviously, I wish we could do more than that, but that's what we can do to deliver a balanced budget. We do have those staff enhancements that we've added over the last couple of years, and then the civil service that's locked in. And this budget also recognizes what we committed to mid-year this year and is in place now, but the full year of the cost and classification study that we conducted, council led and directed, going to 100% of the comparisons in this last budget. So pleased that we're able to do that, but now we're digesting that in this budget. That's about $1.2 million in additional salaries and wage-related benefits. As far as our functions go and our missions, public safety is number one. That's reflected in our expenditures. Police and fire is about 56% of the budget, 45 million of that $80 million. We do have in here a couple of steps for adding new police officer positions, and then firefighter positions, continuing that continuous onboarding so that we can have people to staff the equipment to be in the buildings that we're building out. So particularly Station 8, slotted on Shadow Creek Parkway to open in September of 19. And so we want to add positions. We've been doing that so that we can populate the minimum, just an ambulance when we open. But then we need to, in the next budget, add people so we can get the fire engine staffed as well during the next fiscal year 19-20. Sales tax is another, our largest revenue side, pure revenue on the general fund. We've seen strong growth in that in the last several months, and John McCarty will talk to you about that a little bit. But we've put a 3.8% increase in this budget. That's about 28% of the general fund's revenue. And sales tax, 1% goes to the city, and a half cent goes to Pearland Economic Development Corporation, which is their primary revenue source, and that's about $11 million into that special revenue fund. Based on the value growth and what that does for us and our needs and trying to create a balanced budget, we are recommending and suggesting a 2.4% increase in the overall tax rate. So we've been able to hold the line or maybe even decrease the rate in the last couple years slightly. But that's really a function of that value growth and being able to enjoy that growth. So the flip side of that is when the growth moderates, bring in revenue to sustain the operations. On the operations side, we've increased the recommended property tax rate slightly 2.5 cents. And that'll bring $21 million to the general fund and 36 to debt service. The property tax rate that's recommended is at the effective rate. If you've been on council for a few years, you know we go through that calculation, and that's a state mandated worksheet calculation that the appraisal district gives us. We work with them on, but that's something that's handed to us. And the effective rate is something that says basically what's the same amount, what would the rate be to bring in the same revenue to the general fund for operations exclusive of new growth. And that calculation, somewhat strangely, we've tried to understand that actually has an increased rate to bring in that same amount of revenue. The debt service rate is 43 cents flat, and that's got a little nuance to it that we'll talk about at the debt service piece. If we were to hold our tax rate for the general fund at the same 68 cents and not increase the operations rate, that would be pretty very, very tough on operations and our ability to deliver service. We would not be able to add the new public safety positions at all. We'd have to even further reduce the streets and sidewalks that are already been cut to very small amount. And then we'd only be able to provide, instead of the 2%, a 0.5% cost of living adjustment to the employees. So wanted to at least explain that, and why it's really, I think I couldn't recommend that, and it's not, I don't believe, realistic for us to be able to keep our operations going to the way that you and the community expect. This table we've used a couple years, and just lays out high-level property tax revenue into the general fund. Got the 18 amounts on the left there, and the current tax rate, what that would do. But then in green is what is recommended. Gets up to that 71-cent total rate. And you'll notice the general fund portion of that for revenue only goes from 20.2 to 20.9 million dollars for the general fund. And that, again, is a reflection of that effective rate sort of at work. Some growth from new construction that pops that up a little bit. But good growth on the TERS side, the administrative fee, which is backed out of that and not included. But the TERS is actually growing at the values in that area are growing at a higher rate than the balance of the city, which pieces that out. And then last couple years, we've gone to the rollback rate in a fast-growing city like ours. That would get you, at least in theory, the 8% revenue cap. For that extra, half cent, that would increase the rate a little bit further and bring in, a marginal amount, only $500,000 into the general fund. So that's why we, and all things being equal, didn't go with that rate this year. This table is in the transmittal. Hopefully you noticed that, but we looked at homestead values, did an analysis of that year over year, properties that were improved in both years. And again, as this shows, put some numbers to what I was describing earlier, that residential values are increasing, but not nearly the same rate. In fact, there are areas that the appraised value for the appraisal district purposes were decreased. So half of these homestead properties across the city were zero or slightly negative change in the assessed valuation. If you go up into the 0 and 5, that takes care of 3/4 of these homestead properties. So, they're very, if we kept the rate the same or changed it for those pieces, everybody's individual situation, but it wouldn't have as large an impact as if if the values were going up higher pace. And only 3% citywide of the values in this analysis were found to be over the 10% cap, which is state mandates that they can't go up anymore in one given year. And just an interesting side note, the median value in this piece shows $262,000 for the appraised homestead value. Then we go through and go through a couple of specific examples. We've held these constant, I believe, the last few years just to give you a sense of what actually goes on. And again, with homesteads and different kinds of rates that are going on in individual houses, it's a varied lot. But in this particular one, in the not typical 10%, only 3%, that you could almost call this the maximum. That would be a $225 annual increase from the city side, about $19 a month. And keep in mind too, as you know, the city runs between 20 and 30% of the overall tax bill. The rest of it depends on where you live and what school district. That all goes much bigger portion of the overall property tax bill. Then here's another example pulled out, and this is a 7% increase in the taxable value, somewhat similar, about $109 change annually, $16 more a month. And the senior example, they don't see any change. That's a very, very, very low amount they pay for the city services they receive because of that freeze amount on the senior example. So one of the good things that we're able to continue to do is to invest in new construction. We've got a very strong capital improvement program, and it's necessary for a city as big and as diverse and as dynamic, growing as we are. We have about a $700 million capital program in the next 5 years that our staff manages. More than half of that, 335, is on the water and wastewater side, enterprise fund, and that's all repaid by the users of that fund. A couple of very large projects, the water surface plant at $155 million, and then the finishing up Reflection Bay sanitary sewer plant, and then we've got some other sewer plant expansions or upgrades included in this as well. This is probably not as true as it was the last couple of years in terms of it's a good time to do construction. Interest rates were lower, record historic lows. Construction costs used to be low. Interest rates are up, normalizing a bit, I'd say, and construction costs are increasing, but still the work is necessary and it's still not a bad time from a financing perspective to be doing this work. The rest of our capital program is in basically streets and sidewalks and extensions of major roads. And so that's about $175 million. Have to note, though, one of the liabilities in this budget is that in order to balance and with the revenue we've got coming in and the fixed cost structure, that we are only able to fund $450,000 in street rehab and $300 for sidewalk. And that's more than it's half of what we did this year, which is not what we wanted to do target-wise. So we've seen the pavement management condition structure. If you don't maintain the roads, it's going to be more expensive down the road, literally, as you reconstruct. Our city responsibilities for street and network would say that we should be targeting about $5 million, $5.5 million in regular maintenance projects. So we're 10% of that in this budget, and it's a function of where we're at in terms of growing into the rest of our budget, and we'll revisit that at mid-year with you, and hopefully some of the I hate saying hope because that's not a very good strategy, but hopefully that revenues are conservatively estimated, expenditures are conservative when we can look at adding some one-time expenses into this area as we get into the fiscal year mid-year. Looking out a little bit, we do have projections about debt service. There's a lot that goes into this in terms of how the actual debt service program plays out, but it's a useful guide to measure. And with proposed 2019 bond issue, if that were to go in, you can see what the debt service side would do on the table on the right. But again, this makes use of estimates on taxable value, which are changing and very large. So it's a guide, but I wouldn't want to bet much money on these exact rates. So again, we're in still a good position. Best thing is we're in a fantastic community, and our staff and you all, I know, are committed to making it even better. We're delivering on a lot of the big capital projects. You can see the physical evidence of that with the road network. We opened up Centennial Park, and that gets used all day, every day. It's a great facility. Independence Park is about to open up here down the street from us. We got a fire station that's under construction, relocating out of a 50-year-old building into a new modern facility. It's going to be adequate for our professional firefighters up in McCard and Old Alvin. So there's a lot of good things coming, and bottom line, we're just going to hold things tight for this year. We're not making the fleet investments that I wish we could in this budget, in addition to the road network. But we'll hold things together and bring up the flags when things need to be adjusted during the year. But we're taking care of our people with the highest priority things and the community first and foremost. And so that's the budget we have presented to you. And I will turn it over to John McCarter, who will give you more numbers and a lot more slides.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson, and good morning, Mayor and Council. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Before we dive into the nuts and bolts, I'd like to say for those following along at home or maybe here today online, this presentation and all materials given to Council today are online at PearlandTX.gov/FY19 budget. This PowerPoint starts on page 30. I'd also like to recognize some staff who contributed in a major way to this budget. I get to be the mouthpiece, but I did not do most of the work. First of all, Neely Walker, who's our senior budget analyst. You'll hear from her in just a little bit about our enterprise fund. Rachel Winslow, who's our newest face in the budget office, took care of most of our personnel estimates for us, as long as some of our major departments. Also like to recognize Cynthia Pearson, Rhonda Doherty, and Carla Campbell, who helped us out immensely getting this together, as well as all the staff that are here today. There's a lot of faces from a lot of departments who really took a lot of time to give us the resources we need to put this together and have the expertise to inform decisions made throughout this process. We'd also like to thank you, Mayor and Council, for, again, as Mr. Pearson said, taking time out of your Saturday to come and talk municipal finance. We appreciate your time always, but especially through probably the next 2 months. We appreciate you you focusing your attention on our budget to make sure we're making wise decisions. So diving into the budget, we always like to start our conversation as around our strategic priorities. So we developed these, I think it was about 3 years ago, and we begin kind of the process of our budget development with our early budget input session in February, where we put together a series of white papers around each one of these 6 topics. That feeds into our budget here that we'll talk about today and over the next 2 months. And then eventually that leads to day-to-day operations. We see a lot of department heads here. Our Thursday packets are all around these 6 priorities, all in support of our citizenry and community, those residents and those businesses that call Pearland home. So what is a budget? For those of you who have been through this a few times, this is probably just a nice refresher. But first and foremost, it's a policy document. This is the way that council directs staff, takes policy and makes it kind of an operational deal. It's a financial plan, probably the most obvious bullet on here. There's a lot of numbers behind these words that we're talking about today. It's an operations guide. We keep this on our desk. I reference this just about every day. This also feeds into our new ERP system, New World, that we use to pay invoices. We use to kind of keep the wheels turning and support our day-to-day services. It's a communications device as well. Most people in Pearland don't do municipal finance, so this is our way of reaching out and making it accessible. Obviously, the transmittal letter and some of the digested materials within the budget document are a means to reach out to the community, make sure that they're informed about what's going on at City Hall and across the city. So diving into general fund, obviously this is kind of our bread and butter where most of our services live, that residents see on a day-to-day basis. This year, we are continuing our continuous onboarding campaign starting in the third quarter. This equates to 6 additional firefighters this fiscal year that will bring us up to enough to run an ambulance out of the new fire station when that opens up in the fall. We will look to continue this into FY20 until we get up to scruff in terms of being able to fully staff that station. We have 4 additional firefighters as well, 2 coming on in January and 2 coming on in July. We had 2 drop from the budget last year, so in January that kind of makes us whole in terms of what we wanted to do in 18, and then the last 2 in July would be 2 additional. As Mr. Pearson hit on in his intro, we also have the 2% cost of living adjustment. That's across all funds. In the general fund specifically, that's about $1.1 million. All funds, it's about 1.2, just under 1.3. Also worth mentioning is the remaining component of the compensation and classification study. Obviously, we talked about this at length last year. Last year, it was funded for 6 months. This year, baked into the base, we see a full 12 months of that compensation classification study coming through in salary costs. So staffing highlights, not a ton here over and above what we just talked about. We do see a park naturalist coming on board. That is a necessary position to open up the new Dolores Fenwick Nature Center in just a short while here, in addition to our police and fire additional staffing for a total of 11 in general fund. Looking citywide, this is across all funds. We are adding staff, 18 total this year across the whole city, with the majority of that coming for public safety. But we do also see some public works staff being added, some finance staff on the enterprise side, which Neely will hit on in a little bit. I'd also be remiss if I didn't hit on what's not included in this budget. On the general side, we don't have any replacement vehicles included in this budget. We do have 2 vehicles for the 4 new officers, but in terms of our regularly scheduled replacements, there is no money budgeted for that. And just to give kind of a benchmark, last year we budgeted about 1.3 million. Obviously, we didn't spend that whole 1.3. And in the prior year, we budgeted about 2.1. Um, Next, kind of adequate streets and sidewalk rehabilitation. Last year, we had about 1.7 million, which was still below where we wanted to be. We've taken that down to $714,000 combined streets and sidewalks for this year. That is about $4.3 million short of that 5.5 annual spend to maintain our pavement condition index. From the study that was done a few years ago, I know we have lost points on that pavement condition index since that time because of this underinvestment. Also, additional operational expenditures. Looking at kind of non-salary and non-capital expenditures, we're about $55,000 under where we were the adopted budget for FY18, and that's about 2.9 million under what was requested in those base budgets. So we talk about things like repair and maintenance, professional development, professional services, um, office supplies, that type of stuff that really is the bread and butter that keeps us able to do our jobs every day. We're not we're not adding for inflation on those things. We're asking people to do more with less in this budget. Um, the big note and the big caveat, silver lining that I will add is that for those non-reoccurring items, those vehicle replacements and some of that streets and sidewalks, we do always put that at the front of our mind at mid-year. If we do have additional funding we can throw at those and get those done, we will do so. Um, Lastly, we never give everyone everything they want. There's a number of department heads here who can vouch for that. But we did fund less this year than we have in previous years. 11 new general fund positions represents about 18% of total requests. Within your packet, you see an outline of kind of what we talked about at early budget, what was requested, and what we ended up funding. Um, that's less, even though we're adding on the public safety side, it's less than we'd like to see, and obviously on the general services side as well. Um, the on the supplemental request side, we had about $8.3 million in supplemental requests. Those are needed items over and above what are kind of built into the base, and we funded about 502,000 of that. So obviously, we would like to do more, but this is what's included in that budget. So, kind of getting into the nuts and bolts, the 10-year taxable value history we're looking at here. We did see growth this year in both the TERS and the non-TERS. In kind of the darker components on the bottom, that's the TERS piece, and then the lighter pieces on top. That's the city taxable value that goes towards our debt, that goes towards our O&M rate. Um, the green is this year, and the blue is in previous years. Obviously, we saw growth there, less than we've seen in the last 3 to 4 years, but it is still growing. Sales tax revenue history. So the green component here is our PEDC, and the blue is our city component. We did see an increase last year, if you'll remember, at projection or at carryovers in December of last year. We actually brought our number down to 3% because we've seen some less than expected growth. I'm happy to report we've seen the opposite of that since. In the immediate aftermath of the hurricane, we did see a pretty big bump as we rebuilt. Um, Following that, we've seen that sustain itself. We just got some new property tax numbers on Thursday. We put those out in the packet. We're up 8.4% in the month of August for June sales. Yes, um, over last year, which is awesome. We budgeted for 4%, so we really are happy with that. In this FY19 budget, we budgeted for 3.8% over our amended budget number, which is what we felt comfortable with. Looking at new single-family housing permits along with sales tax, this is another one of those very flexible, um, economic-driven revenue sources that we see. The green bar all the way to the right at 626 single-family housing permits is what we've seen through June of this year. Looking on the blue, the dark blue is what we've seen through June in previous years. And then the light blue is the remaining quarter that we saw in those years. Obviously, we don't know what's coming in the future. We did adjust it mid-year, brought our estimate down to 3.7 million. We are estimating 3.7 million again next year, kind of keeping flat on that number, but you can see we are below where we've been the last several years in terms of that single-family housing permits. I will say this doesn't say anything to the commercial side, but this is typically where we see the majority of our traffic coming through. So looking at revenues as a whole, we talked about sales tax. That's a 3.8% growth over last year. our biggest single line item in the budget in terms of revenue. Property taxes, we see that at the effective tax rate, that increase of just under $1 million there. Um, Charges for services, our largest charge for service is our TERS admin fee, which is derived from property tax. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. But we did see an increase there. Franchise fees, those get paid by those franchise companies within the community. We have a nominal growth factor built in there. Transfers in, those come from other funds. That's really the increase there is from increased salary costs that we saw within the general fund. Other funds pay for services provided by the general fund. Licenses and permits, we talked about that stays pretty flat. Fines and forfeitures, we do have going down. That's just following a trend that we've seen over the last few years, trying to prevent having to adjust at mid-year. Miscellaneous, you see a pretty precipitous drop there. Almost the entirety of that drop is because we are not budgeting anything for a FEMA reimbursement within the FY19 budget. That's in the 18 budget. So any accrual or anything for that reimbursement will be in 18, not 19. So that's just our typical miscellaneous. That million isn't abnormal. We did see some sale of property move over to our motor pool fund, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But that drop is because of the FEMA reimbursement was in the amended budget, and it won't be in the adopted budget for the following year. So looking at expenditures by function, obviously public safety leading the way at 45.3 million, combined police and fire. Kind of looking at the remaining categories here, you'll see public works with a pretty drastic drop there. Most of that is streets and sidewalks, but we did see some other operational reductions within public works. Looking at general government and community services, it's kind of striking that they really don't go down. They actually go up. And that's because most of those budgets are people costs. So when we talk about salary increasing, you see those most drastically within that general government and those community services departments. Parks and Rec, we see going down from the amended. I will say we had about 350,000 built into that Parks and Recreation budget for the Wood Creek Park improvements. That will not be in the adopted budget. That was a one-time expenditure. So that's a portion of that difference there. On the transfers, we'll talk about some of the structure on the motor pool fund side, but we do have a motor pool fund built into this budget. So those repair and maintenance costs that were built into departmental budgets are now transferred out to the motor pool fund. We'll see that transfer line jump. It's a net zero in terms of impact on actual expenditures. It's just that cost is now being realized within the motor pool fund, not general fund or enterprise fund, as we have in the past. So expenditures by category, salaries and wages, we saw the increase here going up for several reasons. We talked about the COLA. We talked about the comp and class and the intro. Those are the two main leading factors. We saw some new staff coming on board this year. We also sometimes tend to forget that when we fund staff in the previous year for part of the year, we absorb the other portion of that for the full fiscal year for the first time. So we see that driving some of that increase as well. On the miscellaneous services, the majority of that is professional services. We see that coming for a number of different services across the city because we do a number of different things. This is also our professional development, our utilities, kind of a big tent category there. We see buildings and grounds going down quite a bit. That is our pavement is budgeted out of buildings and grounds, so that's the biggest decrease there. Repair and maintenance, we talked about with the motor pool fund, that's just moved over to the transfers. You can see the motor pool transfers there at 1.9 million, makes up pretty much that whole difference. We see capital outlay with a pretty big drop. Those costs would be moved to the motor pool fund, but we spent 2.7 million. We talked about 1.3 million on vehicle replacements. We do those out of capital outlay, so that big drop, that's us not doing our replacement program and really only budgeting for 2 cars out of the general fund next year. So kind of the punchline here, we see about 80.6 million in revenues to 80.3 in expenditures. That is a surplus, which is good. We like to see that. But as Mr. Pearson hit on, the fund balance is just barely over our minimum at $14,512. So we are in compliance with all of our policies and all that. We are balanced, which is a very good thing, but we are at the minimum there. So property taxes, getting into some of the things behind the scenes, looking at kind of what's made up of a property tax. There are 2 components of a property tax. The O&M portion funds the people costs, kind of what we do day to day. And then the debt service component covers our debt obligations. That we do the debt component first, and then what's left we put towards O&M. We did see the debt service component stay flat this year. The increase is on the O&M side of about 2.4 cents. So general fund revenue from property taxes. We talked a little bit about the TERS admin fee before, um, but this kind of breaks down everything that we see that comes from property taxes. When we talk about the effective tax rate, we're talking about getting the same amount of revenue from the same properties that were taxed last year. So that current taxable properties line, that 20.1 million, on the amended budget, we saw $45,000 worth of an increase on revenue on those existing taxable properties. On the new construction, I believe that number was 270 million, just over 270 million of new construction that we saw last year, which is a positive. We saw almost $800,000. So the increase that you see on the property taxes line item is driven by new construction, not by growth on existing properties. And then we talk about TERS admin fee. Now, when we look at the general fund, this is a charge for service because it comes back from the TERS. They get 100% of the revenue, and then they give 64% back to the city in the form of a charge for service. We don't see this in the property tax line. We see it in the charges for service. This is where we saw the majority of our revenue increase at $1.2 million. Again, that's from that growth in the TERS, and we see a larger percentage of that dollar amount because of that 64% comes back. That TERS does not contribute to the O&M side of the tax rate, and it does not contribute to the debt side either. So do my best here to talk about the state mandated effective calculation. So with the values going up and the rates going up, why isn't the property tax going up? There is a packet within your binders that has the big long state mandated calculation in it, as well as a cover sheet that kind of hits the high points of it. But when we talk about calculating the tax rate, when we talk about property taxes, you start with your certified value. That's what everything is worth in the city. And then you have to back out the TERS because that's not a component that we count towards our O&M rate or our debt rate. And then you have to take out, or you have to add back in, excuse me, your values that are under protest or not certified. Harris County has not certified their property tax values yet. So this is an estimate that we have as of right now. And then there are some that are under protest. I will point out that there's less this year than there have been in the past years, which is a good thing for us, less guessing. But there is still a number there. And then you have to take back out your tax ceilings, so you're over 65 and the like that we have tax exemptions built in for, which gives you your kind of adjusted taxable value. Looking at the green row here, we're at 1.5% increase compared to 7.1 and 7.4 the years before. So you really see that difference in terms of what that actual taxable value is. And then you got to add in your new value that comes from annexations and from new improvements. We talked about that before. There's your 270 million, 271 million from your new construction that came into the community last year. So looking at sample residential tax bill comparison, those non-city of Pearland entities on here show last year's tax rate. So if they've changed, we have not updated those here. But looking at the yellow line here, last year we were at 0.6851. It's a little less than that. And this year we're at 70 cents, just over 70 cents, which is a difference on a property that went from $285,000 to $299,500, $14,500. I believe that brings the monthly, if you break it down by month, it's around $258 per month for the services that the city provides. So where does your city property tax dollar go? Most of it goes towards debt. That's 61 cents. That is down from last year. Last year it was 63 cents. The next largest piece of the pie is the public safety bit. That is up slightly from last year. That's 22 cents. And then we go towards general government and public works. Public works was ahead of general government last year, but with that reduction of streets and sidewalks, some of those operational reductions, that did drop down. Then community services and parks and recreation as well. Debt service fund. So the city has a specific debt service fund. This is to pay the city's obligations, the city's debt obligations. The largest contributor of revenue here is the property tax revenue at $36.4 million. We also have a payment from U of H for the building over there and some transfers from other funds to cover debt obligations for those funds. We see $38.9 million in total expenditures. Those are for our bonds and rebates, bond payments and rebates as principal, interest, and any rebates that we have. You do see here there are no short-term notes, so we paid off those short-term leases in 2017, which was a major plus for us. Taken together, we do have $1.1 million use of fund balance built into this fund, but we are still projecting to be about 1.8% over our policy minimum. As we did last year, we did commit, quote unquote, some funding to cover or to lower the debt service tax rate to keep it at that 0.43. That's the $5 million you see on the bottom there. Kind of walking from all the way on the left from FY18, you can see last year we committed $5.1 million. And then at projections, we didn't end up having to use it. That just dropped right back down in the fund balance because property taxes came in as we projected them. And then we just used it again this year to keep that rate down where it's at this year. So historical tax-supported debt to assessed value. This is looking at everything that we have in terms of an obligation relative to our assessed value. This is probably our leading indicator in terms of our ability to pay for the debt. You can see that we have come down each of the last, I believe we have 6 years on here, which is a positive for the city. The financial advisor, we'll talk that on Monday, but this is one thing he always hits on in his presentation. Also, inflation-adjusted tax-supported debt per capita. I believe our estimated population is right at 125,000 residents in this budget year. And you can see, again, we see coming down each of the last few years relative to the per capita rate. So looking at everything that we have outstanding, kind of our total outstanding debt at $319 million with $102 million in interest. This year we are looking at $18.6 million in principal, $12.5 million in interest for a total debt obligation this year just on those outstanding debt instruments of $31.2 million with our principal outstanding at the end of FY19 right at $300 million. That is exclusive of any new debt that we will issue next year for projects. So debt service fund projections, Mr. Pearson hit on this top component in his introductory. I will say this is different from what you guys have in your budget book. We got a new estimate last week. So these are slightly higher, but this year we are at 43 cents. We're looking at moving up next year potentially to that 0.4435 and staying flat without a bond election. With that bond election, we do see a 3-cent jump in 20, another 1.5 cents in 21, and staying flat into 22. The asterisk in the bottom is probably the most important piece of this slide. We are assuming 6% taxable value growth in FY20, 5.5 in 21, and 5 in 22. If that doesn't happen, these rates change significantly. So always bear that in mind. So with that, we will open it up to council input and discussion. I think I'll hand it back to Mr. Pearson.
Thanks, Sean. As he mentioned, Mayor, if you're willing, we've got a couple of stop points just to get feedback and questions from council so you don't have to remember things, but that summarizes the general fund and the debt service piece. If you want to go through and give us any feedback or questions, that'd be helpful now.
I'll go down, and I think the council needs to have some comment opportunity. Start with Cabone.
All right. First of all, thank everybody for being here and all the hard work up to this point. I guess first thing, so with our fund balance, and could you speak to what our current policy is and the most recent communication from Moody's Investment Service about our bond rating? And I guess could you add some color to that? Because we're talking about what, $14,000 over general fund. That's over our policy, but our policy, according to Moody's, is low.
Yes, sir.
I'll start that if you don't mind. So you're right. Our general fund adopted operating policy is 2 months of recurring expenditures. So John was at like 13, 14% is what we.
It's just above 15%.
15%. And what you said absolutely is correct. Credit rating agencies are looking just at your ability to pay back and the future, and so they're going to err on the high side. In their ideal world, they've apparently target like 25% of operating expenditures. So that's a tough hill for us in our situation now. They've not altered our credit rating. We still have want to make sure we're all clear about that. I know council knows, but our credit rating remains third highest possible. They did Moody's on their side, not Fitch, put us on a credit watch because of the drawdown. And Harvey has some to do with that, but so that's what I think you're referring to, is that in their world, they would, and we would too, if all things being equal, rather have more flexibility and a bigger cushion there. The piece of fund balance apart from credit is ability to seize opportunities or absorb shocks. And if the sales tax were to dip with the economy, we'd be not have much room to maneuver with that. So that's sort of the flavor of that, if that answers your question.
It does. I just wanted to, our policy is low and we're barely scooting by on the policy. So I just wanted to mention that to start the discussions off. In terms of appraised value and whether this is now at our future meeting, could you give us a sense on how the Harvey valuations, I guess what effect is that, and then how does the 10% homestead cap play into that value? For example, if we had a $400,000 house that got flooded and it's down to $100,000, is that cap in place so we can only step up 10% a year? I've got to think that's not correct, but if we could find out, and I guess if there's any way to quantify what Harvey did to our valuation, I'd appreciate that. On the park naturalist position, have we looked at teaming up with KPB like we have done the Recycle Center or some other nonprofit organization to see if something like that makes sense? And we can hit that now or later.
I think maybe I'll let Chris give a shot at it, and we can always follow up with more if you don't mind.
All
right. Go ahead, Chris. Or Leah.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Didn't have a cooperating microphone. We did do that. Keep Pearland Beautiful, by their own mission, they're more of an ecological. They take care of the litter and waste diversion. This position is going to be more of an environmental position in the sense of wildlife management and natural spaces management. So the expertise that we're looking for would be more of somebody with a wildlife or range management background and degree, biology background and degree. And to go further into your question, yes, sir, we've absolutely looked to partner with other agencies to defray that cost. So the cost burden typically for an individual charged with overseeing a comprehensive nature center and wildlife and environmental management program would be quite a bit higher than what you see there. But what we're able to do is take this expertise and lead this more as just an outward face of the program and an interface with the user groups, and rely on partnerships that are already in place with the Houston Zoo and agencies of that like. So in short, yes, sir, those have been explored, and we've tried to get this cost as small as possible to still be able to manage that facility.
Okay, thank you. And I guess finally, so with the mid-year update, I know we put a lot of positions and things on hold. Is there a summary of kind of what we did at mid-year and how that translates to what's in the current proposed budget?
We can follow up with something specific, but I believe the senior planner is the only position that we removed from last year's budget that's not here. There were benchmarks, I believe, as well, but we can follow up with something line item through there. But
Okay.
most of it is built in here, and the vehicle replacements as well are not here.
All right, yeah, I'd appreciate some follow-up on that. That's all I have for right now, Mayor.
Okay. Let the record reflect that Councilmember Reed is absent from the chamber tonight on vacation. Mr. Perez?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to, again, follow up on the question about the Moody's rating. My understanding that is just their evaluation of our future outlook. That it's not, as you stated, it's not affecting our current rating with respect to our ability to be able to take on debt. Correct.
Correct.
So, I think policy-wise, we've maintained the policy for a while to have 2% or 2 months operating debt. I think that, a from a fiscal conservative standpoint, we really shouldn't be holding on to a whole lot of money that we don't need to. If it's from Moody's perspective, they are looking at our future outlook, but they're not affecting our rating. I don't think that really drives us to want to change the policy, particularly when it would likely require us to affect the tax rate in order to be able to pour more money into that. I think that where we are is where we should be, just barely over the minimum. We have enough cushion in there to be able to deal with issues. It was valuable for when we had Harvey to have that cushion, but it's not likely we're going to have another Harvey, hopefully. And we know that policy works for us. So if it starts getting to the point where that's affecting our tax or our actual debt rating or credit rating, and then that has a financial component to us, that our interest rates are going up, and it has a bigger effect, then I think that's something that we should revisit at that time. But at this point, I don't see it's valuable. I think we need to keep an eye on it, but I don't think it's valuable to change the policy. So I understand that the difference this year, based on the state's worksheet, between the effective rate and the rollback rate, is we would only generate $600,000 more in revenue if we went to the rollback. If I remember correctly from the readings that were sent out earlier. Does that sound about right? I guess the value is not as important as much as it's not a huge increase if we go to the rollback. There's not a lot of benefit if we go to rollback as opposed to stay at effective. Correct.
Yep.
Yeah. I believe it depends on if you take that with the TERS or not. So all the way to the right-hand column here, that 33.2 is at the rollback. We're at 32.6 right now. Again, that's the general fund actual property taxes, your new value, your existing value, and the TERS, which is a charge for service taken together. So that's your difference. So yes.
Okay. So I mean, I think because of that, there's always a headache when it gets reported that we're going above rollback. Though, unfortunately, most of those that are reporting it don't really know what the rollback means, other than the state doesn't want us to go over that. So I don't think it's worth. There's not a whole lot of cost benefit for us to try and go to the rollback. So I think our approach to stay at effective is a good one. With respect to the additional employees and the salary increases, I do think we're going down the right path. I do think we need to maintain the 2% COLA and maintain the commitment that we made last year. For obvious reasons, our employees are our best investment, and we get our best return out of maintaining valuable employees and keeping them happy. Hopefully, this maintaining that commitment will keep as many of them satisfied and stay here and have long careers with us as possible. A couple of things with respect to the positions added, and I'm looking for it in the information packet that you sent out earlier. But the couple of concerns I had was one. I think at this point it's an absolute necessity that we add the traffic engineer, and we add a PE with a few years of experience, 5 to 10 years of experience, along with the software, the Synchro software, for that to be for them to be able to be effective. And I believe from what you sent out earlier this week, that's less than a $50,000 hit for this budget. With one of the principal complaints that we get on a yearly basis being traffic related, having somebody with a little bit more professional experience um, to help guide where future projects would be most effective, help us with the retiming of the lights, review our TIAs, pull some of that workload off of the development staff. I think that's a necessity. So I'd like to add that, see that added. Um, my concern with respect to some of the staffing requests, my biggest concern is on the finance end. I know what's kind of been communicated up through the white papers was that they're still feeling some pressures of being understaffed. Um, I'd like to see if we can't add them this year. I'd like it for it to be a focus of next year for us to uh, try and get a little bit more staffing in that department to be able to deal with this. Obviously, they're putting out material like this quite often. I know there's a lot of demand on the staff to be able to do that. I'm just concerned with the phrasing from the white paper that was sent out in February about them feeling a little bit of burnout, and I'd like to address that if we can't do it this year, and I know that we can't based on the information that's has been presented. I'd like it for it to be a priority for next year. Um, Yeah, I don't want to belabor the point. Obviously, I have concerns about the street and sidewalk funding. I've expressed them. I know what I'd like to see us do. So I want that to be. I would love that for that to be a priority for this year. And Clay, you and I've talked about that at length. Um, we can't continue to do what we're doing. The value of our streets, the rating that we have for our streets is going down. We're spending this year 10% of what we know we need to spend in order to maintain it. And as the west side begins to age, that that values that value is going to go up if we don't have money now to spend or in the near future to help repair some of the older sections. Then we won't have anywhere near enough money to deal with the the sections that are old now and the sections that will be old in 10 years, which is primarily the early sections of the Shadow Creek Ranch development that'll start falling into disrepair as that pavement begins to end its service life or initial service life. Same thing with the sidewalks. Um, I know that the TERS investment has some sidewalk additions in there on the east side of Kirby, on the east side of Business Center. Those are huge necessities. But as I understand, we can't use any of the TERS money for maintenance. So any of the trip hazards, any of the repairs out in the west side, has to come out of the general fund. So again, I think there's some beneficial discussion that needs to be had about alternative forms of revenue for street and drainage repair and sidewalks. Um, on the growth rate for 19 and 20, how confident are we in that 5.5 to 5%? And remind me again, what was our growth rate from 18 to 19?
I think the preliminary was 5.8%,
Yeah.
and I think they came down a little bit with the adjustments. Uh, we saw high eights kind of thing previously. Uh, you know, the pipeline for new residential construction and commercial especially looks good. So, ask me in 6 months, we'll tell you better.
Okay. But at this point, we think that's a good conservative value. We don't suspect it would be a surprise if it was lower than that.
I'd say it's on the high side of conservative. I mean, I might druthers would be 5 or something, but
Okay. Um, Again, on the park naturalist position, I think that kind of falls into the same category as addressing specialists. It sounds like a silly position, but it's something that we've pushed. We put a lot of money in the Fenwick Nature Center with the idea that we're going to have a staff member. If we don't have that member there, then it's like we wasted a lot of money to build that facility. And it's easier for us to criticize that in hindsight, but that was a priority in '07 when we put that as part of the bond package. So I think we need to move forward with it. I'm sure this work has already been done, but if there is any exploration with TCQ or EPA grants for these kind of positions, I think that would be if we can offset that position. Obviously, that type of position is a priority for those organizations. I would think that they would have some mechanism um, to help support community level involvement for environmental positions. So if it's already been explored, if there's just a quick memo to state that. If not, if there's any program that we could support to try and offset the cost of that position on a annual basis, I think that would be worth the exploration. Um, One other note, and if we can speak to this a little bit, I know it was in the memo that you sent out, but we've talked a lot about some of the illicit businesses in Pearland and what we're doing to combat that. My question was, some of the discussion has been targeting it through the development side. I think my personal opinion is I think that'd be limited. There'd be limited that wouldn't be as effective as we want it to be. So I think it should be more on the enforcement side. If there was a number that I think was thrown out, if we could discuss that as to how much it would take under current staff to be able to combat not just massage parlors that have illicit businesses and or that are hiding illicit businesses, but other types of businesses that are masking illicit issues.
I mean, like, as you mentioned, we did cover that a little bit in the memo. I know Chief Spires, you want to just give a high-level overview of how you are and how you would approach that?
Yes, sir. Excuse me, my allergies are killing me. We have 2 officers right now, or potential officers or cadets that are going to be graduating the academy here in the next couple of weeks. By the time they get off training, it'll be around December. If we get these 2 new positions in January, I can backfill those. I can take the 2 new officers and take a couple officers from other places yet to be determined in our department, and I can start a proactive unit. I don't think it's a prolific problem here in Pearland as far as massage parlors, but it is something we have done sting operations in the past. I think we've done 4 in the last few years. 3 of those operations resulted in some arrests. Nothing that would indicate there's human trafficking. We can't be naive to the fact that it might be happening, but we haven't run across anything like that. Right now, we just pretty much respond to complaints. But if I could get that proactive unit started, I could do some sting operations in that area. We could also combat some other things going on around town. And I think we need to pay attention to some jugging, some burglaries, gambling, narcotics, things like that. So these officers would be plainclothes and working closely with probably our task force down in Missouri County, where we have somebody assigned down there, and we would be able to be a little bit more proactive in some of these areas.
And what's the budgetary cost for that, for being proactive? Can we do it with existing programs, or do we need to dedicate funds to?
Well, I would dedicate like you said in the budget, we have 4, 2 in January and 2 later on in the year. I would dedicate 2 of those specifically for that. And then I would add a couple more throughout the department, some restructuring we plan on doing. Of course, everybody would like more people, but we'll work with the 2 and start the unit from that. And throughout the years, we can evaluate it and add people if we need to.
So we feel comfortable that we can develop a program under the current budget without any financial impacts to the 19 fiscal year, correct?
There might be a little bit. We may need some equipment here and there, some mid-year stuff, if that comes available, but I think we can start the unit. Like I said, we do have some resources in the southern end of the county. We have an officer assigned to the Missouri County Task Force. So we can use them on occasion. There's several officers down there we can bring up. for specific operations when we need to.
Thank you, Chief. That's all I have, Mayor.
Good. Hernandez?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a kind of a general question just about, I've had several conversations with citizens regarding their concern on the overall debt. And I see we're at 61 cents of every dollar is going to it now. And I see that we're making strides to pay that down, but I see also that we have potentially another $77 million bond being proposed for potentially next year as well. Just kind of at what point are we, will we ever be to a point, I guess, where the debt is not just aggressively paid down, but actually put into a place to where it's not continually growing, but rather actually coming down to, as close to zero as we can get, if
Well,
that's ever
I
possible.
don't think there's any large business that has zero debt. I mean, any corporation, they're issuing corporate paper all the time, and it's a way to finance, and it's perfectly legitimate and sound, and it's paid back by the people that are enjoying that facility, right? So, if I think our ability to pay is the most important thing, and that debt to value, that the value is what pays that, and that's going down as a ratio. So, and we have a very high credit rating from the people that look at this across the country, across the world, and have their measures. So it's a big number. I mean, for you and me to go and borrow $300 million, that might be a hard stroke. But for the city, where we're at, where we're growing, we've got a plan. We got a good CIP, and things like McCard Road and other projects wouldn't happen but for issuing the debt for that. So I think getting to your question, I mean, when we're built out, we'll have different kinds of capital expenses, recapitalization kinds of things, and they won't be this way. I mean, since I've been here, we've talked about the ratio of the operating to the debt. It's 1/3, 2/3 round numbers. I think we'd all like to moderate that, and maybe when we're built out and all fat and happy, it's the inverse of that. So we're leveraged, but it's expected for where we're at in our life cycle of a city growing up. So
Do you have maybe a timeline in mind that you think would get to that point to where, we're fat and happy and just kind of sitting around and focusing on maintenance rather than riding the growth?
I'll be retired, and
I'll be dead.
yeah, I mean, it's. I think that the important thing is the trends and where we're at and keeping an eye on them as we're going on. And the trend is that we're issuing debt that we changed a couple years ago, and we made our payment schedules more aggressive so that we're issuing normally 20-year debt instead of 25. So we're paying it back quicker, except for things like the water plant that have a long, huge life cycle. So the trends are moving in the right direction. We got to pay attention to the value. And then each year when you're looking at new projects, you got to say, hey, where are we at? And this makes sense. And, can we afford it? So when we talked about a 19 question, we'd originally targeted that to be at a point where we wouldn't have to increase the rate. We could just fold that in. At the time, I think, we're looking at projects and we'd all like to do more, but, maybe we need to pull that back to that 70 million kind of level and target that when that time comes. So,
Okay. Then one thing that I've had this conversation with multiple people here about just kind of the reputation that Pearland has, not being anti-business per se, but still having some difficulty in, I guess, communicating with new businesses and so forth. And I know that there's an onus that needs to be put on the business owner as well, but just I've seen that we have been making strides, and I wanted to comment on that just to say that I think things that maybe, for instance, Josh Lee and I have talked about, as far as communicating, make that process better. I know Assistant Chief Garcia as well. He and I have talked about some of these things, and I think that if we make that process better, we reach out, we build that business-friendly reputation. Hopefully, some of the license and permits fees go up, which obviously will increase our sales tax revenue and other things as well. But I've still had conversations with people outside of the city that think that we have a kind of an anti-business mentality here. And So a lot of the things, that I'm saying today are more for like peace of mind people that may be, watching or listening, things like that, that I do think that we're making good strides, and hopefully that'll have a positive impact on our revenues in the future. Do you see that, looking forward, that maybe in, like, I know we have the west end of town growing, any potential for maybe um, reinvestment or creating a district of some sort to encourage growth, maybe in some of the older parts of Pearland that would bring in some businesses that would help to generate additional sales tax revenue and so forth?
Great question. Thanks for the comments. I mean, I would say the evidence speaks for itself that Pearland is pro-growth. I mean, hundreds of people, thousands of houses have been built, and successfully. And we need to be realistic and recognize that we want to always do better. And I think some things you touched on show that. And we got the right people, and we're going to continue to do that. And the feedback from you and other council members helps put a face to that and point those things out. Building that values job one. We got to make sure the existing properties maintain their value and grow, and then we're attracting new. And I'd absolutely argue that the infrastructure work that we're doing, increasing the mobility, ability for people to get around, has a lot to do with our very competitive stance. I mean, Pearland Parkway getting opened up has opened up the entire corridor, right? And McCard Road, when that gets extended, is going to improve that and help Broadway traffic get around. 288 frontage, 288 itself, that's going to be a huge game changer, and for people's ability to choose Pearland versus other places, because they can get from here to wherever they need to go to work, whether that's in Pearland or elsewhere, more quickly. And so for the established areas, what council saw and signed off on with the 35 beautification is going to help that area. We're working citywide on that, and wherever the opportunities are, we'll jump on those. So, it's a combination, and it's every day doing things big and small, removing problem properties. The work that we did to abate the nuisance properties over there on Dixie Farm, improves the values of the surrounding houses. So we got to make sure that everybody's holding up their end of the deal. You see reinvestment on Walnut, and if you look at the development map, it's pretty scattered all over in terms of development and new housing and commercial properties. We got a lot of commercial land, and we got to get the rooftops and people to support that. So it's a big, complex piece. So, but building value is the best thing we can do for the long haul.
And finally, I guess the question that I have is related to the investment in parks, specifically looking at some of the things we're doing at Independence, and just kind of an overall. I know we've just recently begun tackling how to rent out entire parks and so forth, and so balancing in the recreational component, and saying that that is our primary concern. I think is to provide recreational space. But are there other opportunities to generate revenue, to kind of take some of the pressure off of us to find revenue sources or find money to fund some of these investments we need to make in parks? Are there things that we're doing now, or are there things that we can be doing in the future to allow the park system to maybe generate some of its own revenue?
Just to qualify, I'll let Dr. Leah speak to it more thoughtfully, but I appreciate the comment that anything we can put into our park system, I think, improves our competitiveness and our value proposition for people. And we're making significant capital improvements, and it's diversity of everywhere from what we got with the TERS funding over in Shadow Creek for active recreation of the facilities in the nature center, and knitting those together with paths and sidewalks is important. People do use those, as you know. Whatever we can do on the programming side and the revenue, I mean, we all got to recognize it's on the margins. It's not going to make a big dent. It's a service we provide, and we need to maintain what we have. But the park staff has looked at conservancies and options for that, and other kinds of partnerships, and bringing in agencies to work with. So, maybe Chris can give a little flavor for that and what they're looking at.
That completes your report.
I got two now. So this better be good, I guess. Councilmember, to that point, exactly in line with what Mr. Pearson said, we've explored several options from the conservancies. We're very fortunate that the P3, the public-private partnerships, becoming a lot more of a visible component of Parks and Recreation, and we're trying to work that into all of our capital projects. As you can see, that's one of the largest components of, or that's the instances you see larger numbers in Parks and Recreation. That at the same time, we do recognize that it's a quality of life service, and in as much we have our largest opportunity to have people defray some of those costs within the city through sponsorship opportunities. So this council was kind enough to allow for an opportunity of us to sell and offer different types of sponsorships and corporate naming rights. So that policy is out and available, and currently under a little bit of a tweaking, I'll call it, to make it a little more user-friendly and widespread that we could use in different types of business opportunities. So as with all costs across the city, we're constantly looking for different opportunities to fund those, and particularly ongoing and long-term opportunities to fund those.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm obviously a proponent of the parks, and so anything that, we can do to push those things along, I think they do help to generate additional revenue by raising our property values and so forth. But I appreciate the thoughtful response, and that's all I have for today. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Little?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, staff, thank you for all the hard work that went into this. Having done this in the private sector, I know how hard it is to put together a budget. So I appreciate the hard work. How do our year-to-date sales tax revenues compare to the same period last year?
I believe, and Rachel, you might need to correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're up about just over 8% from last year this time. I think 8.5% over last year this time.
All right. Well, that's good. The 3.5% increase in the property tax rate, I don't really have a big problem with that. I think with the growth in the economy, right now, most people should be able to absorb that without too much difficulty. One discrepancy I'd like you to explain on the tax rate calculation worksheet for 2017. I don't see an adjustment for the tax increment reinvestment zone. I see it in 2018, and I did see it on your presentation, but I didn't see it in this calculation. It was about a $2.5 billion difference. And am I missing something, or?
I'm trying to remember that worksheet. I think they only look at it when they're backing it out for 18. So I don't think that they just take the 17 as a given, and then they start from that. So if that makes sense. I don't think they go back and recalculate for 17. So
Well, for the total adjusted taxable value, it shows like a $2.5 billion difference on the calculation worksheet, but I didn't see the same math on the.
Which line are you looking at on there? There's like a number and a letter. Which line are you looking at?
Yeah. Okay, well, I saw it in the final number, so I guess we're looking at 9.6 there.
1 and 6. 1 and 6?
Line 6 compared to line 23. You can get back to me on that. It looks like the change was made in the presentation anyway, so. Let's see. It looks like we're going to have a net debt increase of about 47 million this year. We're reducing by 30 and adding 77, yet our percentage of the amount that we're committed to servicing debt is going down. Can you kind of explain how that's working when we're at it? We've got a net increase of 47 million.
So the 77 million is actually for the bond referendum. That's not built in yet. There'll be future discussions, and there's a whole nother process outside of the budget process for that. So when we talk about the new debt being added, that's not in yet. So we'll sell more debt next year that's not included in the total outstanding debt, that 300 million. Is that what you're referencing?
Right.
Yeah, so that 300 million does not include debt that we'll sell next year because it hasn't been authorized by council yet. We don't want to take that.
So that number could go up, the number to
So it's built
percentage
into
of
our
budget?
payments in the debt service fund. So we have an estimate for those bond payments. But when we sell debt next year, we won't see those actual payments come through. The obligation for the debt service isn't until 20. Does that make sense? We'll sell the debt next year, but not have to make a payment until 20.
So that percentage of the amount allocated service debt will actually go up once that number is adjusted for the,
No, that won't change. Our obligation for next year won't change. Maybe I'm not. I
okay.
might need.
Remember,
someone
which
to help me
page
out.
are you looking at? So I
Sure
can-
how that works, but
If you go to slide 45, it might help explain it.
can you talk a little bit about how a potential natural disaster or a downturn in the economy, like we saw in 2008, would affect our budget for next year? Since we're operating on such a small margin for our Moody rating.
Sure, I'll take a first swing, and then Mr. Pearson might have some thoughts. So, I mean, we do have that reserve there, obviously. I think we saw, frankly, at mid-year this year, we adjust our budget accordingly with the resources coming in. So we would, first take advantage of that fund balance to kind of keep us moving, and then revisit with council reductions in the budget to get under that number. So, I don't know, Mr. Pearson, if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a strategic weakness we got to keep in mind. I mean, if there was something unexpected like that, we wouldn't have, we would go below our policy. I mean, that's what it's there for. But you need to have a plan to pay that back. It's just we don't have a cushion to stay above that if we'd had to spend $3 million out of pocket for another disaster expense, right? And we'd go through the same process where we'd look to reimbursements and so forth eventually. We've got that cash in the bank for those kinds of things, but we wouldn't be able to pay that back as quickly. I guess that's the main point.
Okay, I'll reiterate what Councilman Perez said. I'm a little concerned about the low amount we have allocated to sidewalks and street repairs. Seems to be one of the things we get complaints about. Let's see. As we all know, we've had a lot of citizen complaints here about our utility billing, specifically the water bills. And is there going to be any type of, with additional manpower requests, is there going to be any shift towards addressing those issues?
Yes.
I know we get a lot of complaints that, number one, how rude the people are when they call in to question the water bill, and number two, that nothing seems to get done about it.
Well, to be fair, I mean, as you can expect, if you don't hear what you want to, you may take something the wrong way, and we always will work to make sure we're conveying that information properly, correctly, every time. But to the point for the people, we've got a big operation with all these accounts, and we need to have more people to be able to field the questions that are inevitable. And so that's what this is doing with those two positions out of the utility fund, the enterprise fund. And that'll give us more bodies to be able to pick it up quicker and answer those questions and address things individually when they come up. So that goes together. If we want to improve that service level, we need to put some resource behind it in addition to the technology and the systems we have in place, and those will help us and pay off. But in the end, we've got a big complex system like any utility or cable bill or electricity, and we need to be able to have the people to field those in addition to the online capabilities and what have you. So that's going to only help us to make that better.
Thank you, Clay. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thursday, Mason, you first. I don't need it right there. Okay, Councilman Moore?
Thank you, Mayor. Going back to the bond rating. So with the bond rating being what it is, and potentially we could end up going a little lower than what we are now, how does that affect the interest rate on any of our debt, or does it?
Well, we'll have a test that on Monday. There's a sale for COs, so you'll hear from Mr. Roebuck about how that was received, and there's lots that goes into it. We're not. They're just put us on a. Moody's is not Fitch, so there's two different rating agencies because of the drawdown and somewhat Harvey, somewhat planned. So we're not at any immediate risk of downgrade at all, and. Pearland, everything I've heard, seen still has a good name in the credit market, and so we'll find out Monday is a interim test here. But the big numbers that we showed you on the slides still hold, and that's accurate, and we're in good shape. So,
Okay, thank you. And you had made mention that the Harris County numbers have they have not set their rates yet, or we haven't received their rates yet. How is that going to impact us? Is it going to be, I mean, I know it's a small portion of the city, but how does that affect us?
yeah. So it's not going to a material effect. It shouldn't. As you said, it's a small portion of our $8 billion, the $1.9 billion that they've got. And the estimate that's in there is very sound, so it shouldn't move a lot. It may give us a little bit more flexibility when we get that in a few weeks, but it's not going to shouldn't materially change anything. This happens every year. Harris does this. Thankfully, we're only a portion there from this standpoint. All the cities in Harris County have to wait until third week in August for the ACT certified number.
So it won't affect our tax rate one way or the other, up or down?
I'm hopeful it won't. Maybe it'll give us a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more cash, because maybe there's been good amount of construction on the Harris side with River Bridge and some of those other developments over there. So, maybe that'll give us a little nice surprise, but it'll be tens or hundreds of thousands, not much more than that.
Okay, thank you. So I know there's not much play in this budget, but is there anything in this budget? We talk about going out for a bond. Is there anything in this budget that could be shifted to the bond opposed to this budget cycle?
No. I mean, we looked at some capital leases, when we were really scrambling around for some of the hardware. I don't think we went down that road. And I really would encourage that. I mean, we're a big city, and we shouldn't, I don't think, necessarily be doing those capital leases for equipment. We got the TERS that's paying for the new fire equipment, so that's good. We've moved everything off that we could and can and should, but the rest of the stuff is operations that you don't want to bond for, those kinds of things.
Okay, so no capital projects that could be shifted towards the bond that we plan on trying to do within this budget or even next year's budget.
John, is there anything you can think of, or?
No, nothing that comes to mind.
Okay, thank you. As far as like the traffic engineer, what's our relationship with TxDOT on this issue? 35 is really not ours. 518 really is not ours. And those are, two of the major roadways. 288 is not ours. Those are the major roadways and arteries through the city. What input does TxDOT have on that? And can we petition them more to get more help from them on the traffic engineering side of things?
Fair question. I'll let Mr. Epperson answer, but I'll give you my answer. I think we need a traffic engineer to help battle TxDOT and get what we need for Pearland. We need somebody that can have the expertise to, we've got consultants, obviously, we rely on to do those kinds of things, but the TxDOT roads in town, as you mentioned, are significant ones, but there's a whole bunch more than that. We need to do work on neighborhood roads and intersections, all kinds of things, and then over and above that, we need somebody that can have the expertise in-house that thinks only about Pearland and can make the arguments to TxDOT to get them to be more reasonable generally and more realistic generally. So, but Trent will have a more political answer, I guess.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Councilmember Moore, when a city in Texas exceeds a population of 50,000 in a census year, TxDOT basically hands over all the traffic signal system within your municipality on their FM or other state facilities to the municipality for the operation and maintenance of that. So that occurred to us after the 2010 census. And there's very little, there are to almost none, there's really no help we get from TxDOT on an operational standpoint. We can, as we look at intersections and different roadways, we can request safety funds if it's a safety issue. We can get state and federal funds potentially for intersection improvements and work with the area engineer on those sort of things. And that's the type of things that a traffic engineer would help us be able to look at, analyze, and package up so that we can approach TxDOT on those things. But the day-to-day operation of the traffic signal system, that is all ours with zero state help at this point.
Okay, thank you. One last question here. As far as sales tax, I know in years past, we've actually asked to lower the anticipation of what we were getting from like the 8% range to the 4% range. And we're looking good so far this year. But with the decrease in the housing permits that are coming in, that leads to believe that we're going to be even heavier on relying upon sales tax dollars. Do we see that sales tax dollar amount will hold steady, increase, or are we expecting a little bit lower than this year than last year?
I'll give my opinion, then John can give his. But I'd say on that one, we're very conservative. I would bet we'll be higher than that 3.8, just the way things are trending. And you think about the rooftops that are here, the retail establishments that are here, the trajectory of what's here, the business is good. Most of our retail sales come from the big boxes, the Walmarts of the world, the Home Depots, et cetera. As long as people are feeling good and buying and the economy's good, that shouldn't slack off from what the trends we've seen. I mean, so the good thing is it'll be what it'll be, and at mid-year, rather than committing money for it now, maybe we just keep that in our back pocket, and 6 months from now when we revisit, take a look, and then maybe we can reinvest those monies or do what council wants to at that point. So, John?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 3.8 is really a 3% increase on year-to-date through June, or July, I'm sorry. So that's 1 year further than the amended budget. So that's where that number came from. We also want to keep in mind we saw a bump after Hurricane Harvey. So the 3% we went conservative on because we don't expect growth in those months because it went so high with the reconstruction as well. So we feel that that's a conservative estimate, the 3%.
Okay, and then my last piece, and I'll turn it over to Councilman Owens. If we do have any overage in that sales tax revenue towards the end of the year, I'm just going to say it right now. I would like all of that, if possible, to go between the street and sidewalk fund and look at putting some of that into motor pool fund if we could, as we're not going to do some of the police fleet that we had talked about doing or not able to do. So when we come in with an overage on that, I'd like to look and see what we can put towards the motor pool fund and the streets and sidewalks.
Councilmember Moore, that is a good presentation. Councilmember Owens.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate the information that's been put together on this budget this time. It's really in depth, all 1,100 pages. So, but it's a couple of things I always look at. One is reoccurring costs, and I see where we have people that are slotted to come on board for 3 months, some not till 9 months, but that's all reoccurring costs that will have full payload on those in the next year's budget. And so I think what we're looking at right now with a possible increase in the tax rate, I think would be certainly looking at it again, there was a statement made on the water plant out here about 150 million. But if you go in the water sewer fund and take a look at it, it says that to meet the city plans to issue 34.2 million, and then 141 million, 109 million, and that's in the next 3 years. So when you look at that, and then you go across and see what the debt rate is on it, and the projections on the tax rates to the general fund and debt service, we're looking at increase this year going up to 0.7415 over the 20, and then another increase for the following year. I think, previously on council, we decided that the surface water plant was something that we needed to look at on doing that, and that's why we went in and bought that property out there. But intentions of making a delay on that when we needed. A couple of questions on that. When that's actually able to come to fruition, and we started utilizing the water, or actually the water that we're buying from Houston on the west side, do we not do that anymore? What do we got, a 5 or 10 million pay or take for water over there?
If I could, Mayor, Member Owens, appreciate what you're saying. We can try to tackle that now. We've got a whole section next. We're trying to break it out, but water and sewer is all next. And as you know, that has zero to do with property tax rates. So you mixed in some things there. In the recurring costs side of that was a general fund item. And the 10 of the 11 people are police and fire. So for police officers to enhance that side, and then 6 on the fire side that we need. We're building a new station. We need help. We need bodies there, and that gets that ambulance going on the fire side. So that's on the general fund side. But I don't know if you want to hold the water type questions till we go through all that in the next bit. Is that okay? Or
okay, well,
yeah.
Water had been mentioned previously. We're going through here, and then it had been mentioned about the amount of bonds that we're going to sell. On the debt portion of that, I know we've talked about this before on a possibility of a bond issue coming out, and then it was discussed that would actually probably do it on not going to the public with it, but doing it on general obligation bonds and what have you. And I'm not a fan of doing that, to be honest with you, on general obligation bonds or COs or GOs, either one. I think when we go to that to take a look at that and see, I think that's something that would actually have to go out and let the people vote on it. It's their money, their city, and I think, what we talk about being transparent, I think we need to make sure that for us to do that, of going out on a bond issue if and when we do, is to take it to the public.
If I could, that's the way the May 19 question is set up is whatever y'all decide, whether it's 70 or something else, whatever those projects are targeted, that goes for voter consideration as a general obligation bond. So that's the way it's always been described.
Okay. Yeah, like some of the other council members talked about, I think, of just on rehab, 454,000 and sidewalks 259. And that's down quite a bit, but we got a lot of older, especially on the east side over here from 288, this side coming over here. If you drive through some of the neighborhoods and things of that nature, you see, that a lot of repair needs to be done. And I don't know if it can be held off for a period of time or not. And I noticed in the budget, we had previously bought a concrete truck, I guess. Was that to do some of the street panel repairs or things of that nature?
It showed up this week, and Brandon, Robert, you want to talk about how you're going to use that?
Councilman Owen, yes, that concrete truck is be developing, as City Manager Pearson stated, is that we just got it in last week, and it'll be utilized quite heavily doing our utility repair cuts that are in concrete streets, but then also taking a look at supplementing that work with sidewalks and streets that can be done in-house as well.
we don't have any batch plants around here. Where we gonna get the concrete at?
We'll have contracts with those suppliers that are nearby, so we can get that concrete.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Yeah, and are we still doing work with Missouri County on asphalt and coming in and us buying it and they doing a lay down on it, or do we plan to do any of that this year?
Currently, right now, Councilman Owen, is that that process is going. We currently did some streets off of Miller Ranch Road, and then the county needed to mobilize somewhere else, and they'll be back in about another month to do some areas located off south of Bailey Road. And so we continue that partnership on an annual basis.
Okay, and some of that with whatever these funds are gonna be used for, will be pothole patching and things of that nature, and
Yes, and if I could add to what Mr. Upton just stated, with the reduction in funds that are going to be available to us in fiscal year 19, we may not do as much with the county, and we may do more of that in-house because the funds are so limited. We want to expand that to do additional, take additional tools in the toolbox of maintenance and repairs with crack sealing and different street raising and different things like that. But with the diminished funds, we may be doing a lot more in-house and less with the county, just because probably the materials we bought for the county program this year exceed the budget that we're talking about having for next year.
okay. I know last year we had to have a fallback on, because of reductions in some of the areas. Is there anything planned on the general fund area to, if things don't come in the way we anticipate coming in for the property tax revenue off of it and the sales tax, do you have a plan?
So, good question, and I should have added, that's one of the advantages of having a fund balance, is that it cushions when you don't have revenues coming in. I'm comfortable because, property tax is going to come in where it is, and the sales tax is conservative, like I said. Unless the economy, we're all surprised, then we just have to make adjustments. But it's a fair question. If we had to adjust, our levers are limited, and we'd have to go to, we've drained the fleet option for this year, and we'd have to go to the streets and sidewalks, what we do, minuscule amounts we have in there, as going for anything significant, because the rest of it is so fixed, there's not a lot of other levers to press.
Yeah, and for those, on roads and the infrastructure side, on streets and sidewalks, with the congestion that we have, I know on Friday or Saturday, I can leave here on the east side and go to the west side, and especially if you go out on 518, it's a 45-minute drive to get over there, unless you go out on the tollway and pay, to do it that way. But it seems like right now that hopefully the traffic will pick up on Magnolia, and I think once we're able to get the card through it, it'll probably help out. But as it is right now, you see a lot of people taking the back streets and putting more traffic on some of the neighborhoods in order to miss that traffic that you have on 518 and what have you, to go over there. So, we're doing projections for this year based on what we need to get by for this year on there. And so hopefully, when we look at it for the future and the other budgets coming in 1920 and 2021, we can get by without having to do a tax increase on that. But I don't think we have any large places of land left in order to go and build like we have in the past for residential. I think that's going to impact us on the smaller amounts through there. But, well, I do appreciate everything that's in this budget, how far I got. And like I was telling you the other day, you said, well, see, you got on page 2. And I said, yeah, I only got 2.5 pages of notes getting on page 2. But there is a lot of work that went into this, and I really appreciate that. I know there'll be some other concerns coming up on it. Each one of us is set up here on city council. We have to report to the whole 125,000 people out there. and their concerns. So I hope the estimates that we're using here for the revenue coming in are good, strong numbers that we can rely on. And, but as we go through, I think, we'll be looking at another increase for next year too. That's it.
Does that complete your comments? I think we need to make some effort, some more and better efforts to increase our residential facilities as much as possible because they serve two very important functions. One is they develop a population. And once you have population, you get retail coming in, and retail provides opportunities for sales tax. And as your sales tax increases, you have the opportunity for it helps out our budget quite a bit as we go through the process. And so as we develop our plans for both the Parks Department and other organizations, I think we need to try to do those enhancements that we can to get a property tax, plus the fact that we have sales tax coming from those residential properties. We've made some good progress in that area, and I think that we need to remember that a city that has nothing but rooftops has property values in the future because they deteriorate over time. We're very fortunate to have Matt Buchanan and the Economic Development Corporation because we do have a place for people to live and a quality place to live for people who come in and develop our businesses. Their employees and the owners can also have fine residences in the community as well. That's what Lonzo was one of the pluses that they had. They said when we come in, it's a quality city, but it also is a city for our employees to reside, and they said it's a double plus there for us. So I think we need to spend some time and some effort on how we can enhance those areas that would increase our property tax and our sales tax population base. And I think there were some good questions raised by City Council. I guess it's time to move on into, I think you've talked about the direction of preparing the maximum tax rate publication. Are you finished on that portion?
Right. I don't want to press too much, but I kind of got the sense informally that you don't have to decide now, but we'll prepare the information for the 20th where you're required to set the maximum tax rate. I didn't hear anybody, arguing, pushing that beyond. We'll set up the documents if there's no objection to be at the effective rate for that 20th, unless somebody says not somebody, four of you say something else.
Okay.
Is that all right? And then just process check going forward, Mayor. We got two sections left. We got water, sewer, enterprise funds, and then we got special revenue funds, and we got opportunities for input after each of those. So we can either push on now, or if people have been taking breaks, or if you want to take a formal break now, whatever your pleasure is.
Well, we've been pretty well taking cereal breaks up here, so that unless the council wants to take a formal break.
I think taking a break's a good idea.
Let's try about less than 15 minutes at the most.
Mayor, can I just add one follow-up? If you go back to slide 45, so it's got the asterisk down there. Can staff provide maybe a little bit more historical context to the growth that we've had in our taxable value, as well as how it relates to our permitting? I just want to make sure we get these projections right, not only they are projections, but I want to make sure that we all are comfortable with them because I assume we'll use these projections for the May 19 bond election. I think we owe it to everybody to get these estimates accurate. And they could be, but I want to have a little more in-depth discussion on that because there have been comments about debt, and that's the reason that we're going out for a bond election is to put that in the voters' hands. And if the voters, want to vote it down, then their debt rate won't go up. It's on them. But that's ever since I've been on council, we've been trying to complete the 07 bond election. So I look forward to putting another one out there, and if everybody, doesn't like our debt service, then that's the opportunity to vote it down, and then those projects won't move forward. So anyway, if we can have that for a follow-up.
In addition to the history, if you don't mind, maybe it strikes me we should put a couple of bands like, +4 and +8, what that would do, just so you got a range and what that does, because it compounds and like you saw with the TERS, a good year multiplied does great things, and a bad year the opposite. So we can try to show a little bit of that. So.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, we'll take about a 10-minute break. If you can be back by 10:40, we'll be back to work. Moving in our agenda to item 4, presentation of the water and sewer. Clay?
Thanks,
Pick it up.
sir. So we have 2 sections left that we'd like to cover with you. The first being our enterprise funds, and that's a water and sewer self-supporting fund, and Neely Walker will walk you through that right now. So.
Why me? There we go. Okay. Good morning, Mayor, Council, Mr. Pearson. Will be presenting the enterprise fund team. There are several new positions within the enterprise fund, which are a new distribution and collections maintenance crew, a backflow inspector, 2 new customer service representatives, and a reclass of an existing position to a lead building specialist. A pretreatment technician, in addition to the positions on the previous slide, were added to the budget for a total of 7 new FTEs. Revenues total $55.2 million and includes no rate increase for fiscal year 2019, down from the 18.4% increase forecasted last year. Water and sewer fund expenditures total $53.4 million, of which $17.38 million is included for debt service and capital lease payments. Other requirements, department, which includes debt service, makes up the majority of the expenses at 46%, followed by water production at 20.1% and wastewater at 10.7%. Revenues over expenditures are $1.78 million, leaving a proposed ending cash equivalence of $20.87 million. Bond coverage and cash reserves minimums are met. Of the $39.8 million needed for water and sewer CIP requirements for 2019, $34.74 million of revenue bonds will need to be sold. The principal balance after the 2019 payments of $17.29 million are made will be $190.46 million, excluding any new debt issued in 2019. The 2020 forecast a revenue increase of 5.2%. The city anticipates selling $141.64 million in revenue bonds, of which $90 million is for the surface water plant. A revenue increase of 12.7% is anticipated for fiscal year 2021, leaving an ending cash equivalence of $9.15 million. Bond coverage and cash reserve are met at 1.7 and 25% respectively. Revenue bonds for 2021 are anticipated to be $109.5 million, with the majority of the funds to be allocated to 2 water reclamation facility expansions and the balance required to complete the water surface plant. The city revised its rate structure to a base charge scaled up by meter size. The rate increases, when required, followed the rate structure put in place in 2016. Due to the significant capital needs in the last few years, revenue increases have been required to ensure financial health and stability of the water and wastewater system, which follows several years of no increases. Water and sewer rates will remain the same in fiscal year 2019. A 2,000-gallon residential customer's bill is still $38.04, while a 10,000-gallon residential customer with the sewer cap of $8,000 has a bill of $103.52. Again, there is no increase to commercial customers. The current bill for a residential customer using 6,000 gallons of both water and sewer is $67.20. The same customer in League City has a $61.27 bill, and in Friendswood, $51.98. 92% of the 37,000 customers are residential, 1% multi-unit, 4% commercial, and 3% irrigation. Of those 37,000 customers, 94% have a 5/8 inch or 3/4 inch meter, and the other 6% have a 1 inch or higher. Residential customers consume 65.3% of the water sold, commercial 22.6%, and irrigation is 12.1%. At this time, I'd like to turn it back over to Mr. McCarter.
Thank you, Neely. So at this point, we'll go through internal service funds, and then we'll talk about special revenue funds, and then open it up for some comment. Getting into the internal service funds, our first fund that we'll talk about today is our property liability insurance fund. So this fund essentially exists to pay for premiums for general liability insurance, including windstorm. We are projecting, I think, a few rate increases. The overall expenditure is relatively flat, but are going up. We also pay for 1/2 of one position in our HR department out of this fund. Our fund balance of $142,000 is over our policy minimum of an average of the last 3 years of claims, which is roughly around $80,000 or so. We kept that elevated fund balance in there because we've seen a lot of activity come through related to Hurricane Harvey. And that fund balance just allows us some flexibility with the ins and the outs with our reimbursements coming through. Our medical self-insurance fund, this should look familiar. We had our consultant IPS come through in June and talk through some of the high-level stuff with you guys. This is what it looks like in terms of fund balance. We are in excess of our target of 30% by about $300,000 right now, so we're in pretty good shape here. The motor pool fund, the newest fund for the city of Pearland this fiscal year. We've talked about this each of the last 2 early budget input sessions. This is more or less just kind of getting the infrastructure in the ground for this fund. We have talked about once this fund is up and running, it will support the fleet replacements. But right now, it really is only doing maintenance. So we're just taking the maintenance cost that lived in enterprise fund, water sewer, other operational funds, and moving it here, as well as the fleet department operations costs will be operated out of this fund. In the coming years, we'll look to develop this, but this at least gets us a starting point, gets a foot in the door, and a place for us to put seed money as it comes up as available. Other funds, so looking at some fund highlights for our special revenue funds. We do have $500,000 that was approved by the Convention and Visitors Bureau board for the renovation of the train depot. This project is contingent on an additional $400,000 in fundraising, grant funding, and other potential funding sources. We also have several Parks and Recreation projects coming out of our Park Development Fund at the Natatorium and at parks across the city. That fund, the development fund is paid as developers come in by zone, and the Natatorium qualifies as a citywide park. Looking at some other funds here, the Court Building Security, Court Technology, and Juvenile Management Fund are all self-sustaining funds paid by or supported by fines associated with convictions. Citywide donation, I believe we have some animal services expenditures coming out of there this year. Looking at sustainable infrastructure funds, our solid waste fund has a big negative number in there. That is a result of the debris collection, which was paid out of this fund this year. That will not be a negative fund balance at the end of this year. We will have an accrual for the FEMA reimbursement, which will reimburse, I believe, 100% of those debris costs. So although it shows a negative there, we will get that money back. Looking at our Parks, Recreation, and Events, we talked about Hotel Motel. We see a slight drawdown on the fund balance there, adding some funding for park donation and a drawdown in park development. In Tree Trust Fund, we do have a drawdown in that fund balance for a tree grant program throughout the city. And Municipal Channel, the PEG Fund, that pays for some of the hard infrastructure associated with our municipal channel. And then looking at the grant funds, we do have a drug enforcement and emergency management costs coming out of the grant fund, and the CDBG was discussed Monday at the public hearing that we had. Pearland Economic Development Corporation, their budget was approved by the board in June. Some of the highlights include some business incentives on State Highway 35, implementation of a redevelopment strategy, and continued investment in Lower Kirby and the IB District and South Spectrum. Fee updates, we do this annually as a part of the budget process. We put it out there for departments to consider their fees. This is a separate ordinance which we'll bring in September in concurrence with the budget adoption and the tax rate ordinance. This year, I think as Neely hit on, we don't have an increase on the water and sewer rates, so we will not be updating that ordinance. But we do have 2 fee changes for your consideration. Neither of these is projected to increase revenue per se. It's more just a restructuring of existing fees. On the Parks and Recreation side, this would update our aquatic supervision fee for large events from a lump sum daily amount to an hourly amount to better reflect staff costs and city costs associated with oversight of those programs. And then on the development fee side, splitting the plating and variance fees into 2 parts. Right now, it's one lump sum payment. This would create a non-refundable application fee that we would keep in the event that it was submitted in error, and then a filing fee that would be the balance of that fee once we accept it. This was brought on because with Trackit coming online, people can kind of submit whatever they'd like, and staff spends a lot of time on plats and variance requests and the like that ultimately were submitted in error or wrongly, and so that refund process takes a lot of time. So with that, we'll open it up for any discussion, enterprise funds, special revenue funds, or any of the fee updates.
Okay, let's let the council tap on this, starting with Woody. Owens? Any comment?
I guess that last slide that we saw on separation of those funds, I think that is a real solid thing for us to do. Because a lot of stuff is not ready even when it comes to council on there. And I think, separating those funds like that on some, it's not coming back on there to them. I think that's a positive thing to do. Do we see on doing that, how much estimated revenue would that increase be if we did that?
For which, I'm sorry?
On the separation of the funds, to come in and prepare something ready to come to council. And you said you were looking at doing a fee for that, but also a non-refunding fee if there's a problem on it and they'd have to come back again or whatever. Do you have any, I know that it must be a problem or you wouldn't want to do it like that. Do we have anything?
Sure, I might defer to Mr. McDonald on the background of what that would entail.
I don't think it would be a substantial addition. The main look at this was that we were getting to the point that a plat would come in, it would be processed, split up to all the different departments, representatives would begin looking at it, and then a week later they'd come in and they'd pull it or cancel it. We're not doing it this way, we're doing something else. And then under current rules, we refund the entire amount. So that time that staff spent working on that plat or that plan, there's no compensation for, we lose that time. And so the idea, it's not a humongous problem, but it's enough that we've noticed that we're processing refunds on things that we've actually spent staff time on that we wanted to at least try to tie those together.
Yeah. All right, well, that's, could we go back to on slide 53? Just have some clarification on it. On the projections that we're using on the water and sewer, given all the emails that we've received, are we pretty sure that on that those projections are correct? I mean, people are saying that they're not using that much water, And I don't know, you know,
Sure.
which way to go
Sure.
on this, really.
Yeah. I mean, the water by and large is getting used and billed. I mean, we've had to increase the rates and, why Mr. Branson could tell us numerically, but water's getting used. And as you know, it's a small slice of the overall that, and probably specific issues, whether they be outside the city limits or whatever, for some of those. So the water usage and the revenue is a function of weather in large part. So it's been good for water sales. That's how we're able to recommend no rate increase for next year. And but if it's real wet and steady, we'll have to revisit that for the year following. The other piece of that is the capital program, and that's pretty well locked in. So there's it's a big fund with $50 million and millions of gallons of billings. So it's the best estimate. I think it's solid for right now. The new connections, what have you, all going in there together.
Okay, once we get the plant done, how much water, what is it, 10 million gallon a day?
Yeah.
That's what we're looking at right now. that
Yes.
Being able to produce.
Yep.
How will that impact what we're having to buy from the city of Houston?
So that'd be a 2021 or 2-ish topic, but maybe 3. 2023 is when we'll be able to take water out of there. But, maybe Trent or Robert could talk to how we take that out.
Sure. We'll always need to have that capacity in our system with the 6 million gallons a day we have as a take or pay out of City of Houston at the FM 521 plant, just to meet our max day demand. That's really driven, by the number of connections as well as what the max day supply we have to supply is, and that's going to be summertime when it's 100 and everybody's running their sprinkler systems. So on a day-to-day basis, once we have our surface water plant online, we will be able to reduce, what we're taking from City of Houston through the 521 plant. And since, our projections are that our cost to produce will be significantly less than what we pay City of Houston per 1,000 gallons, that we will, we'll have the system set up to where we can reduce that, and we'll use that water when we have that max, that approach and have that max day demand.
And so when we do McHart through there with that water line, we're coming out of the southeast plant in Houston, which is a lower rate than what we pick up from the other side, on the west side. And so we'll be supplying water. Will we increase that amount that we're getting out of the southeast treatment plant in Houston?
So right now, our agreement is we have 10 million gallons a day out of the Southeast Water Plant. We're looking through our water modeling over the city as a whole right now, and some potentially changes to the way we operate in a single pressure plane at this point, which may change some of what we push east versus west and those sort of things. So we are potentially looking. We'll be having conversations to look as to whether we can get additional capacity out of the Southeast plant. And then in that case, we would be using the surface water plant pretty much solely to supplant the 521 take point, as opposed to the Southeast plant coming through Alice.
Okay.
There's a lot of moving parts. It's a big, complex system.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to supply water to the west side out of that one, and then that line go down. Then the city shut down for water.
Yeah, we do have multiple. Everything's interconnected, and will remain so even if we look at different pressure planes, so that we, have that redundancy within the system with the multiple surface water take points plus our well system.
And that's what I was wondering on the revenue we're anticipating in comes from the actual sale of water on there. And so, I just want to make sure that all the complaints that we're getting is it's actual water that they're using and not an inflated number for some reason, whatever, to throw off the projection.
I think that's a great question, and I know there's been conversations about the billing system that we initiated in April of 2017. All of the issues that we've had with the system have been corrected. The actual bills that the individuals receive on a monthly basis is based on the actual consumption. If a resident calls about a potential, they have a concern about their bill, what we can do is the utility billing department can then contact meter technicians. They'll go out and they'll actually pull a profile on the actual meter, and it will show the water that actually goes through there. The billing system, all it simply does is take that information, the information that is pulled from the read, the actual consumption, and then it calculates it. When you actually look at your bill, you can see on the bill, it shows you how to calculate it there. There's actually a diagram there that shows you based on the consumption what the actual calculation is, and you can do the math and see that the math is right. The vast majority of time, the meter is accurate. I don't think what we've done well is over the last 2 years when we've increased the rates, I don't think we've done a good job, and we intend to do a good job on education moving forward, that water's expensive, that water is expensive, it's expensive to maintain and operate this system. And that during the summer months, what happens is water consumption goes up, and we take the actual reads, do the calculation based on the consumption, and that's what the bill is. The meters themselves that we currently have, those meters, it's almost impossible for them to read more than the actual amount of water that's flowed through there. Very rare circumstances when that happens. The vast majority of time, when we pull the profile, have a conversation with the customer, then they realize what the issue is. We've had some issues this year regarding winter quarter average. If somebody's just has a bill and they haven't been, that account hasn't been established, well, we've made some adjustments on the winter quarter average, which relates to their sewer rates primarily. So in general, the system is operating correctly. The revenues, we have no doubt that are going to come in. It's based on consumption, and it's based on the actual rates that are adopted. So I feel good about the overall program. We talked about personnel in regards to customer service. It takes a long time to go over each and every one of these issues that we have with the customers. And so what we want to do is, instead of the people that are out there answering the phones that are dealing with the vast majority of calls, we want to bring in 2 new customer service specialists that will be able to handle those kind of questions and resolve those issues quickly.
So all the emails that we get in, each one of those are being handled?
Yes, sir.
Through the water side, okay. Yeah, that was a big concern. And the rates that we have, the winter rate, what you spoke of, and the other, is that an averaging type?
The winter quarter average, and Elizabeth can correct me on this, I believe it's based on, it's the winter months, I think it's December, January, and February. That's how your sewer rate is calculated, based on those average months, which typically is the least amount of water usage that you have. And then that information is gathered, calculated, and that becomes your sewer rate for the next year.
Okay. So, and that information is being given to people when they call in and think, because there was some concern about, I don't know, the difference in the dates on there, that some was based on 38 days of consumption, other was.
Well, that's a whole nother issue within itself, but in general terms, the ideal billing cycle is between 28 and 31 days. We don't want to go any further than that. We did have one billing cycle. It was 38 days, and that's certainly not the ideal situation. That was based on a holiday for that particular cycle. We have many different cycles. Remember, we have 37,000 customers. Those all get read on a monthly basis, put into the system, and then bills are sent out. And that's every month, month after month. So in this in that one particular case, it was a 38-day cycle. It was based on consumption again. And then, of course, the next bill would be for a smaller cycle, but that's not the norm.
Final question on that would be, we've approved for meters, what, 20 million? Or 13 million, something like that, 13 million, I guess it is, on the meters, and then additional 7 million on time in. What is that going to do? Is that going to give us a big?
I'll make a couple of comments and then I'll let Trent, Mr. Epperson, and Mr. Upton follow up on this. But one of the things that new system will be able to do, the kinds of questions that residents have, they'll be able to go in and get real-time information. They'll be able to go in and get history that will be able to tell them, okay, last summer in August, when it was, 100 degrees for 7 days in a row, and we didn't have rain for 2 weeks, my consumption last year was essentially the same that it's been for this year during that same time period. And they can actually pull a history. They can pull a profile that will give them the detailed information. And we believe that that will give them information that will help them better understand their bill. In addition to that, I think what it will also do is help people realize how conservation in regards to water, it is a commodity now and in the future, how valuable that's going to be as a tool to help them conserve water in the future.
Yeah, you mentioned the 15 million for the meter program, and then what was the other 7 that you mentioned? What was that on? I was wanting to clarify.
Was that on the new meters?
No, the new meter program, everything altogether is about 15 million.
Yeah, because we made 2 approvals on there. I think one was 13, and it'll come back again on another one tied into the meters, and I guess that's the communication or.
Right. I think that was south of $1 million. It was $700,000 or so on some of the. It was several $100,000, but that was the equipment. So the overall program is about a $15 million project to replace all those meters.
Okay, so that would probably, from what John is saying, is helping us in the future with a lot of the problems that we're getting now, complaints.
So yeah, it's got a lot more front-facing functionality for our customers, much like the smart meters we have nowadays with our electric companies, where you can see usage by day. You can chart, the temperature of the day on that day and kind of see how your usage is, and you can, you'll be able to see, basically if you got your sprinkler coming on in the middle of the night, you'll be able to see some of that as well. A lot more functionality front facing towards the customers where they can get that off the website. And it gives us a lot more analytics like that to when they call in and have concerns or questions to help answer those questions. And then there's details on the progress of that project in a Thursday packet memo that went out this week as to where we stand on the project. But eventually the project will provide us with a much higher read rate than our current AMR system. Our current AMR system is a drive-by system, and this one you don't have to drive by any of the meters. If we have any unreads, that's the only ones we've got to go back out in the field for. So it'll reduce our read time and our ability to make sure those the turnaround on those billing cycles are meet what they should meet as well.
Okay, so this year, coming up in this bond, or even not the bond, but in the enterprise system, we're looking at flat rate on or no increase in the rate.
No increase in the rate is what's proposed for this year.
Next year, are we just delaying it because the following year you're looking at a 12% increase or something like that?
I believe next year the projection is 5.2, and it's the following year that is about 12.7. Of course, those are projections. There's a lot of moving parts. Annually when we go through our capital program and look at some of the major wastewater treatment plant expansions, we're always looking at that versus the capacity in those plants and the amount of capacity being used. As we talked about a little bit earlier, that with the slower growth in the number of new single-family residentials, we've seen a slowdown in the available capacity we have in those plants being used up. So that allowed us to push off selling some of that debt for those plant expansions. So we'll continue to do that and look at those rates annually to see what type of rate increases we need. But for this year, we're very comfortable recommending a no increase in the rates.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. With the new water meters, when they come online, my biggest fear is that they're going to read more accurately than what the meters that are out there now. And people only thought that they used a lot of water now. What do you have any projection on what the I guess the accuracy is on the new ones versus the old ones, and what kind of flood of phone calls and emails and stuff we're going to get once these new meters are in?
Councilman Moore, I'll go ahead and tackle that question. Is that we'll be installing what is called mag meters or electromagnetic meters, and those have an accuracy down to about 1/100 of a gallon on the smaller meters. Taking a look at that, that'll help us provide accurate reads, keep track of accuracy on our water usage as well. To see what that'll happen or transition, we are actually working through our communications package with our communications department right now to start being forward-facing on that, as we'll be deploying those meters in the coming 6 months or so out to existing customers. Currently, right now, we'll be looking towards the end of the month to utilize the new meter styles on brand new development only. So those won't have a history at this time.
Okay, and so the new meters will get phased in the older developments in what year?
We're looking towards the end of this calendar year, which will be probably right around November, December, once we get our antennas up and we start doing our test case, make sure everything reads correctly on the AMI system. Once that's done, then we'll start going citywide towards the end of this year, first of the new calendar year.
Okay. Other question is I can't remember what slide it is. The slide that shows the water rates compared to other other cities. Yeah, 62. Thank you. Yeah, this one. So I know we are always comparing ourselves to somebody else, which I don't like because there's not probably any other city that's even comparable to us. Not because we're better or anything, but it's just hard to compare one city to another. But in Pasadena is roughly the same size of us, if not larger. How is it that their water is so much different than ours when their consumption is probably more than ours? I don't know. I just find it hard to understand.
I'll try to tackle that, council member. All systems are complex, and there's different sources of water and where those come from, and cities are in different parts of the growth of their infrastructure. So I don't know that I can speak real detailed to the difference between us and Pasadena. I do know that we have two major components of surface water that we get from the city of Houston right now. Those sources of water are traditionally more costly to produce water than a well water system, which we still have a large component of our system that is well water. And then, of course, in the future, we'll have our own surface water plant online as well. So I think that's a piece of it. What are your sources of water? What is the maturity of your system, and what you have to pay for that raw water as well. The other side of it is on the sewer side of it, the wastewater side of it. We're still having to expand and grow and size our plants for current growth and future growth to accommodate full build out. Whereas Pasadena is much more further along, almost to probably close to complete build out. So those sewer plants have probably been expanded to their maximum capacity many, many, many years ago, and are more in that operation O&M mode, recapitalization mode, And so their debt cost for doing those type of major projects, they're probably past that hump. We're probably more akin to League City, share similar sources of water with League City. We're probably a little bit ahead of them on some of the major growth, but they're coming right behind us. So I would expect theirs to kind of follow along ours in the future.
Okay, so majority of our stuff is more built out, not so much O&M and water cost as much as is what we're having to do with the growth on expansions.
Yeah, a big piece of it is that, meeting growth we see now and future growth and expanding the system to meet those needs.
Okay, thank you. My other question is this just thrown out there for anybody who's listening. I know a lot of the complaints that we got was from one certain area on the water rates, and that area just happens to fall into a mud, which there's a calculation where that mud is part of the cost of their utility bill. Can you just speak a little bit to that that cost?
In accordance with the ordinance that we have, anybody that is outside the city limits of Pearland, they pay 1.5 times the rate that a resident pays. So that's the vast majority of that cost. They also have, I believe it's a $5 mud fee associated with that in addition to it. So that's going to be above and beyond what someone that lives inside the city limits of Pearland has.
Okay, thank you. One other question, and this something I probably didn't know, and if maybe I heard it wrong when we were speaking earlier. So the price of water increases and decreases as the weather does, a wet year versus a dry year. Is that correct?
The cost of water does not change. We set those rates. It stays the same. It's typically a customer is going to use additional water when it's very, very dry. They're gonna water throughout the summer their lawn, and that increases usage, and thereby increases their bill, which increases revenues to the system.
Okay. And my one last question on the average billing. I understand on the sewer side, but is there a way that we could do an average billing on the water, i.e., based upon I don't know, where the summer months are not so high, where you're paying a more standard cost across the board all 12 months versus coming into the summer months and getting a huge bill where all winter long you're getting a really small minor bill?
From my perspective, I think it's, this is it's consumption based. And I think it should be based on consumption.
I agree. I mean, let's take some personal responsibility. I mean, I don't know. We have hard enough trouble calculating a regular bill. Now we want to go into a month-long average and those adjustments. I mean, if you use more water, pay for it. Simple. I know my electric bill is going to go up in the summer, and it's going to go down in the winter. I know the same thing with water. I mean, we're not going to solve everybody's problems up here. We got
No, and it's just a question I had to see what if that's even doable or not. I know it's a complex system and it takes a lot to do it, but it's just a question. Questions that I've been asked a lot. So I'm done, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Going back to slide 53, where it showed 2017, 2018 comparison, and yeah, just out of curiosity, what's the big difference in the 2017 revenues versus 18 and 19? We're gonna expenses and revenues look like they're about 45% higher that year.
I'm being told it was the refinancing of bonds that year.
And how would that drive the expense side of it?
It's essentially an in and out. You can see really what you want to look at is the difference between the two. So, I mean, both the revenue and expenditures are up because you basically get the revenue in, that's your refinancing, and then you pay it out. Does that make sense?
Pay off the old bonds as an expense. You got this cash that flows in from the new issuance, and then you pay off the other one, so it's both sides of that. So.
There's some arbitrage costs, bond issuance costs that you pay, but essentially it's an in and out.
So we made like a lump sum payment toward debt of 40-something million dollars that year?
We paid off what was callable for 40 million, plus or minus, but when we sold new debt to bring that in, and then it goes into just regular debt service for a lesser amount.
Okay.
It's like transferring from one credit card to another, correct?
It's doing that, but counting that transfer as income and then expense. That's why I hate government accounting. I mean, you refinance debt and you call it revenue, and when you refinance it, you pay off the other side, and that's an expense.
You're showing balance sheet items on the income
Yes.
statement, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, for a couple of CPAs, that's confusing. Okay, on that aquatic supervisor, you went from a flat rate to an hourly rate.
Yes, sir.
Was that an expense item or a revenue item?
Revenue item. So the person who's renting the facility pays that fee. I would defer to Chris on the logistics of it, but that's a revenue.
And will that result in more or less revenue?
Councilmember, should result in more revenue. Right now, that fee was set some time ago, and what we've seen is some of the meets requiring pool operators to be present aren't the 6 to 8 hours anticipated. They're turning into 10 to 12-hour sessions. So just to at least recoup all of the expenses that are into those FTEs that associate with that, we've altered the structure.
Thank you. That's a good thing.
Yes, sir.
I recently handled a citizen complaint about they just purchased a new home and they moved into it, or actually they started working on it before they moved into it. And fortunately, with Clay's help, we were able to resolve it in a positive manner. But he, on his water bill, his water usage was the actual gallons used, but his sewer side, and it was a 200 or 300 gallons he actually used because they weren't living there. They were just going back and forth and working on it. But his sewer usage was over 6,000 gallons, and he was told that that was an estimate until they had 3 months of actual usage. And when he asked, well, when they have my actual usage, will they credit back the amount that I didn't use in sewer? And the answer was no. And if
Remember, Little, if I could, when you brought that up, we've started applying that generally for such cases, and we're going to get the ordinance to catch up to that. So when you flagged that for us, it was just a past practice and made sense, but there's these exceptions like you said. And so I think we fixed that for current, and we'll codify that coming up here.
Okay, will the new AMI eliminate that problem?
It didn't have anything to do with that. That's strictly the read piece of it with the AMI. This is how we apply what you said, the winter quarter when there is no experience, if they move in after that time. So.
Okay, will the new AMI system, does it result in or equate to a reduction in manpower due to the fact that we don't have meter readers?
Excuse me, I just about knocked the computer off. We currently have meter readers that assist utility billing by reading meters on drive-by. We would be reusing those staff members to be customer service out in the field. There's still need for meter installs. There's still need for inspections of the meters and also rereads or looking at them to make sure that they are moving correctly in the right direction, and also with customer service that they're doing as well. So it would be a reallocation of how their job duties are, but they are still needed.
On slide 62, which shows the city comparisons, there we go. Can you explain why our sewer component of our bill is, I think, about close to 60% of the total, and when you look at the comparables, it's much less. Why is that? Is there more debt allocated to the sewer side of it than the water usage?
I think, following up on what we discussed earlier, the major projects that we've done in the most recent past is the expansion of the Reflection Bay project, which was about that plus it was about a 60 or $55 million project, probably the most sizable project to date. And so that's what's driving a lot of that on the sewer side. I think we'll see that start to shift as we move into selling additional debt for the surface water plant. But the rate model breaks those out by whether it's water or sewer, and then the rates move based on, the actual expenditures split out between the two different utilities.
So as we mature as a city, then you should see those numbers kind of even out.
I mean, based on what I see from some of the others that are maybe a little further along, that's a possibility. I think it's going to, fluctuate depending on what the needs are of the system at that point. Whether we're, 15 years down the road and we're into heavy wastewater treatment plant rehab because we just expanded all those at the same time or similar, close to the same time, or, whether we're in the cycle of, rehabbing or expanding our surface water plant.
That's all I have, Mayor.
Councilor Hernandez.
Kind of a follow-up for what Councilmember Moore had brought up about the new meters being solid versus the moving parts and how accurate that is. I heard you, someone say something that we have the ability with the new meters to read down to approximately 1/100th of a gallon. That's what, like 1.3 ounces of water used? Is that just per every gallon, or?
That's basically anything that goes through that meter. So the current meters are positive displacement meters, which they have mechanical parts in them, and at very low flows, and especially as they age, don't read those low flows. So I think that helps from a couple of standpoints. It's going to capture more of the actual use. So when we report to TCEQ annually, we look at water production, water we bill for, water we use for fire suppression, water we use for water line flushing. I think I've got everything there. And then the gap between what we produce and all of those uses is called water loss. And we've got to report that. When we went to the Texas Water Development Board for the low interest loans on our surface water plant, that was one of the things they noted. And then at the time asked us how we were looking to address that. We said we've got an AMI project, and then they offered then to add the AMI project to what we were borrowing for the plant, so that we could also get those done through a low interest loan as opposed to some other financing mechanism. So that all ties together to go to say that it'll record those lower flows, capture that, so we have better, more complete reporting from that standpoint. The other thing I think that it really benefits is when we do have whether it's a leak in our system, we'll be able to detect some of that. And then when our customers, have a very low flow leak, yes, now that's going to come through on the bills, but they'll also be able to see, that, and we'll be able to help with that their usage never stops because they've got some very slow leak that may not have been detected through the older type.
That was actually going to be my follow-up.
And then that can get addressed by the customer.
Is there a way to, because I know you said that it's real time now, is there a way for those types of things to be flagged to let customers know ASAP, hey, you've got a very low flow leak, and before it adds up to something substantial?
There's some ability to run analytics with the analytics side of the system to help identify and flag those types of things. And Robert may have more detail on that, but I think that may cover it.
Councilman Hernandez, Mr. Epperson did cover that, is that one of the things is to be forward-facing and taking a look at what analyticals we can provide to the customer so they can see what they're doing. And we're evaluating those different platforms in the coming months with Itron so that we can be very proactive. And so we're looking at that at this time.
Another thing, I did a little bit of reading on just kind of how different, systems handle billing, and I know there's like flat rate versus block rating and so forth. Have we looked at other billing systems or fee structures and so forth? Is this the best possible structure that we have right now? Just and I ask this only because when I've read, uh, so it looks like we're billing based on meter size. Is that correct? But it's a flat rate based on that meter size.
Yes, sir. So there's two components to our rate. There's the base rate, and that is meter sized. And then there is the volumetric rates, which your base rate comes with 2,000 gallons. And then once you move beyond 2,000 gallons, you're paying a rate per 1,000 gallons in different blocks. The city went to the block rates, I believe, in the early 2000s, and went to a block rate with kind of what we call conservation rates. So as you use more water, your rate per 1,000 increases, and that's an encouragement to be a good steward of using water. And if you use more water or excess water, you're going to pay more for that. So that was done at that point. When we relooked at our model and our rate model in 2016, that's when we moved to the meter-based meter size base rate. And the purpose of that is that basically at that point, whether you had a 10-inch meter or a residential, a big commercial property with an 8 or 10-inch meter, or a residential property with a 5/8-inch meter, you were paying the same base rate. Well, the system has got to have a lot more capacity and ability to deliver water to that customer that's got the 10-inch or 8-inch meter. And so we looked at a meter-based base rate at that point, based on the additional volume that those larger meters can provide a customer using the 3/4 inch. Our residential meters are mostly 5/8 and 3/4 inch, so we use the 3/4 inch as the base rate. That then the volumetric differences above that multiplied to get the base rates for the larger meters. So what that did in essence is, before we moved it, you really had kind of residential customers subsidizing to some extent because they all paid the same base rate. Commercial customers that have the larger size meters, and now the commercial users are paying much more of their share of that. And that was the purpose for moving in that direction in 2016.
Okay. And then this is kind of one of those questions for the people listening, but the winter quarter average, I guess, utilized to come up with that sewer impact. What's the justification behind that? And is there a way to more accurately assess fees for impact on the sewer?
So I'll take an attempt at that. As John mentioned earlier, we take the water usage in the December, January, and February months, which are typically the lowest use months for any residential customer, because they're not using water outside. They're not, running their sprinkler, and it just typically tends to be the lowest use months on water. So the purpose for the sewer rates is, and the winter quarterly average is that kind of establishes a base for what is going into our sewer system the rest of the year. It's that amount. It's not what is used on the lawns or outdoors. And so that establishes that lower rate that the sewer rates are based off of. Metering, what goes through the sewer lines, I think, is probably not feasible from a financial standpoint.
Okay. Yeah, and one of the reasons, I guess that we're asking so many water questions is because of the number of people reaching out with questions, concerns, and so forth versus their what they call the water bill, and now I've started referring to it more as the utility bill, simply because as we're looking at this slide that's up right now, I mean, it seems that there's kind of a disconnect right now, and Mr. Branson talked about the communication aspect of it as well, that it's not just the water that's being assessed on that bill, but rather it's the water plus the sewer plus also the garbage as well, and trying to break those things down so that people understand that, if we're looking at the numbers here, it's $27 is your actual water versus the total bill, which may be, if you add the the trash on top of this. I mean, we're what, like close to $100. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there just for the people that may be all probably, 5 or 6 of them watching, to know that bill encompasses maybe a few different charges. But when you look at it from this perspective, it doesn't seem so bad. And when you look at that $100 that is the amount due. So I appreciate you all breaking this down. Thank you.
I'm always kind of amazed when people say, I've got a big water bill. And I say, well, you got a water, sewer, and trash pickup on that. Oh, I didn't know that. It's called a water bill. I thought it was a water down at the result of water was down at the bottom of the bill. So that's maybe we need to change the name of the bill instead of calling it water bill, call it utility something. Councilman Perez.
Thank you, Mayor. Sticking to the water meters, less about the bills and more about future forecasting. In page 9 of the multi-year forecast, there are a couple of numbers on the 2020 and 2021 forecast that I'd like to discuss. You'll just let me know when y'all are ready. Page 9. It's not on the slide. It's in the book. Are we ready? Part of the hope with the investment in the water meters and the surface water treatment plant is that it will allow us, the surface water treatment plant will allow us more independence, and also, at least my hope is at a lower cost on the water production end. I'm presuming that under the description for water production, part of that cost is the cost of us being a customer to the city of Houston, or water that comes into Alice Street and 521. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. At what point would we realize, if it were to be realized, a lower cost in water production as we take more water from the or from the surface water, as opposed to being a customer to the city of Houston at the 521 take point?
I think being able to produce water out of that plant will occur very close to the end of 2022, early 2023 calendar year. So I think we would, have the plant starting up that year, and it would take some time, to get the plant up and running and make those modifications to the system. So I would say 2023 at the earliest.
And just future forecasting, theoretically, in 2023 and then subsequent years, we should see a lower cost in water production, or at least a lower rate and increase in water production once that plant comes online.
That's a long ways in the future to project, and our costs go up buying from City of Houston typically on an annual basis, and we'll still be buying out of the Alice Street plant. But I think from a standpoint of how much we'll have to buy annually out of the 521 take point, should decrease.
Okay. I mean, I think that's part of the justification for us doing the project, is to reduce our overall costs of water production. Not only to have autonomy, but also not to be a customer, and then also provide the water to some of the surrounding areas as additional revenue. So I know, I presume that was the answer, that we're not quite to the point where we can realize that forecast, but I'd like to see that, at least some kind of understanding of what we think that savings may be. Obviously not in this year, but maybe in a future memo as we lead into the next year's budget cycle. Same general question on the water meters. We've got water meter service at 1.1 million 1.15 million. For this year, 2020, 2021, those values are going up, but we're spending a significant amount of money to replace all of the meters. So again, should we not be realizing some savings on the service of brand new meters? Why would we expect that service cost to go up after we replaced them? This is on that same page.
Neely may be able to help us out here, but I'm expecting that that number is based on meters, quantity of meters in the ground growth. So as the city continues to grow, whether it's 600 or 700 residential per year and additional commercial properties, that's that growth.
Where would we project some savings from having less staff having to deal with the maintenance and repair of new meters?
The staff are still in there right now, as Robert mentioned. While we'll have, we won't be doing the drive-by meters. We still will have meter techs that will have to check on meters that don't read and replace meters that don't read. And then one of the other things we're looking at is currently all of our meters are installed by contractors, and we're looking at whether or not to move towards us installing those to ensure they're installed properly. It's a different type of meter, and if we move to that, there's a potential revenue source there, because right now we just charge for the meter. If we move to that, we charge for the meter and the meter installation.
I guess just for my edification, I'd like to see have some understanding of where we're going to get some return on the investment for putting in the new meters. I know the value in it. I'm not arguing the value of the new meters, but if you buy a new car, you expect you don't have to spend so much on maintenance.
Well, I think one of the things there is that we will have reduced cost in meter replacement, because right now we bear that cost of replacing hundreds of meters annually that either no longer work or beyond their service life, whereas these come with the first 10 years a 100% replacement warranty, and then in the years 10 through 20 a prorated warranty. So we'll see some savings there. I think probably as much a driver, and the reason behind this as well is that we'll capture that the additional water we're not capturing right now from a revenue standpoint.
Yeah, I think it's kind of dovetails into the bond conversation we're going to have. I mean, we've got projects that we've done through COs and other expansion projects that we're doing, but I'm not able to show in any of the documents that I have a rate of return. Where's the ROI for this to the citizens? Why we spent $50 million on this water plant? When are they going to see that adopting that debt will save them money later on? It's kind of the same thing with the water meters. We're spending, and I can't remember the value of that project, but when are we going to see that value return to the customers we serve? And I appreciate that I'm oversimplifying it significantly, but there needs to be some simplification of that, I think, as we go into the bond project and show some rate of return on the money that we're investing back into our infrastructure. It doesn't have to be answered right now, but maybe just a Thursday memo or some future presentation where that's discussed. And if it's not realized by 2021, then an idea of when it would be realized. On the development funds, John, I support what you're doing. I think that's a good move. If we're spending a lot of money returning money to people who weren't prepared for their application, or kind of burning our time looking at stuff that they don't intend to move forward with. Just for clarification, are we saying when we say we split it up into two fees, is it a one-time fee with a non-refundable component, or is it you're going to pay this to apply, and then once the plat is approved, then there's a refundable fee at the end of the application process?
It would still be a one-time fee payment. The fee would be the same amount. We would just break up the existing fee into two sections. One would be application review fee, or initial processing, and then the other would be completion recordation. So we're not proposing increasing the fees at all, simply reallocating how that fee is broken up so that if and when staff time is spent reviewing it, it's not lost time.
So it's essentially, we're looking at a non-refundable component to offset the cost of the development staff from reviewing plat applications and variance applications that don't move forward, correct?
Correct, sir.
Okay, it's not a way to refund the finance department's time for them to process the refundable.
No, sir.
Okay. I don't know if this is this assumed as part of the development fee? I know it was specifically referenced plats and variances. Do we have similar components for PUD, CPs, and zone changes?
I believe the idea was to put it against all planning-related fees. We do, in the permitting on the building side, have a application fee as part of the fee structure, but on the planning side, it's simply a one fee that is refunded if requested and the application doesn't go through.
Would there be value in doing that for other development-related submittals, such like TIAs? If we have a master drainage plan that's put in for a subdivision for the drainage review?
I can't speak to how that fee structure is set up for those, but if it's not, then yes, I think anything that takes staff time to review and process, and then the applicant decides for some reason to stop the project or withdraw, then that time should be covered by a percentage of that fee.
So I guess, yeah, maybe to simplify, that'd be my request. I think it's a great idea. I think it's totally justifiable, particularly when we have overworked staff. For us to have overworked staff, that's also depleting the amount of money that we're generating through the fees. If anything that we can apply such kind of a rate structure to in the development community, I think it's justifiable. It's a small non-refundable component for review, and then another component for finalizing the application, any fees associated. I think we can expand that. It shouldn't be a revenue generator, but we shouldn't be losing money doing it. I do think we've got some discussions we have to have in the next budget year when we talk about jumping up the cost of the water sewer bills or the rates that we discussed in the future plan. I don't think there's any point in belaboring it now since we're going to hold steady. I think that's the right move, but I do think that us as council need to keep an eye on that over the next year and figure out how we want to address the necessary increase in the water and sewer revenue that we're getting through the water bill, and how we may want to adjust that so it's less impactful onto the residents. That's all I have, Mayor.
Okay, Councilmember Carbone?
Thank you, Mayor. You'll go to slide 72. It shows the traffic improvement fund. Is there any way we can squeeze some funding out of that for a traffic engineer? Seems like a...
Neely?
No, sir, those funds are restricted.
Restricted to what?
So developers, whenever they develop property, pay into this fund whenever their business impacts traffic. And so that money is there to, for example, when HEB came in, they contributed to the traffic improvement impact fund in order to put in the signals over there. So those funds are restricted to the area in which the businesses are located.
So, Councilmember, what we do with those funds is if we have a capital improvement project, we transfer those funds into that capital improvement project if it covers that area. So we look at annually at where those sources of those funds came from, what intersections, what road improvements, and then if there's a capital project associated with that, we apply those there. Or if we do a traffic signal project where we've had multiple contributions from different developers for that traffic signal, they go into funding that CIP project.
Okay, is all that, those restrictions based off of local ordinance?
You know,
I guess maybe if we follow up,
I'm hearing from our city attorney that that's state law.
okay.
So that's what guides that.
Okay. So there's no way to squeeze out funding for a traffic engineer out of the traffic improvement fund legally? Okay, and for those improvements, can we look at the allocation? Because we had a traffic engineer on board, we wouldn't have to hire a traffic outside consulting firm. There's no way to squeeze that to get additional funding via those capital projects. And we don't have to answer that now, but
No, I think the the functions of what our traffic engineer would be doing, while replacing some of the functions of our consultant we have under contract now, that I think it'd be a stretch to relate that to specific projects, because on those specific projects we're going to still bring in a consultant to design those intersection improvements and those traffic signals. We're still bringing a consulting engineer to design that roadway improvement. We won't be designing those in-house.
okay. All right. Slide 75. So EDC total revenue for the year is 12 million or 11.9. Our beginning fund balance is 23 million and our ending is 19. So our ending fund balance is about twice our revenue for the year. What's our current debt at the EDC level? It's on page 5 of the EDC tab. I'm sorry, page 9. It's 12.8 million. I guess the question I asked last year, and I'll ask it again. We all sit up here saying we want to do something about debt. Here we've got a projected ending fund balance that includes $1.2 million of bond payments. That's going to be 19 million. We've got a total of principal outstanding right now of 12.8 million. Why would we not look at paying this debt off? That would save us $1.2 million in cash flow between now and 2030.
Member Carbone, I think the issue, about 5 years ago when we started accumulating, funds was that we wanted to pay with more of our projects with cash and not issue debt on a regular basis to do our projects, which we'd previously been doing. So if we were to do that and pay off all this debt, first of all, I don't think it's callable now because we just issued this 2 years ago or a year ago. I think we've got another 5 years, I think, before it was callable. So I think we got 2 or 3 years before it would be callable. But then we would have to start issuing debt to do any of the projects that we have in our, long-term forecast that we're doing. So, right now we're in a position, so, like the big project we're doing on 35 for $6 million. We got the 288 project coming up in 2 years. It'll be, a significant portion of that, that we can do those out of cash and that we wouldn't be issuing debt for those projects.
I hear what you're saying. Even if we were to pay all the debt off, we'd still have, $7 million at the end of this year in reserves. We generate additional revenue every year. And besides that savings, it might cause pause on any future projects, but to make sure that project, I guess it's easier to spend money when it's sitting in the bank, But if you came to the future council or future EDC board and said, hey, here's a $10 million project, we've got to issue $10 million worth of debt, and here's what that looks like, that's going to probably get a little bit more scrutiny than, hey, we've got $12 million in reserves, let's go do a $10 million project, we got the cash, let's go do it. So I guess I'd like to see when the callable date is on these bonds, and maybe a cash flow projection to see what that would look like. Because we all sit up here and talk about debt. Here's a clear instance where I think we could pay off all, if not a large portion of it. I think it makes sense.
If I could, we'll highlight the multi-year of the PDC, but it lays out pretty well the obligations that we have and the projects, and so we'll revisit that again. But that multi-year that the PDC has in there, there's some material out there that we can point out and bring that back up.
And we're going to cover that in the next section?
In terms of the,
Multi-year?
don't know, we didn't have that specifically, so.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to look at that much closer. That's all I had, Mayor.
That finishes you up.
Just one follow-up question to something you brought up, Matt. So do we know when, did we look at when that debt is callable and what the associated penalties would be if we paid that debt down early? Just so we have, if we're gonna explore this, as I know Member Carbone wants to do, we know what the impact would be.
And looking at that multi-year, yeah, it says our fund balance would be 9.9 million at the end of 2021. So rough numbers, I still think we could stroke a check and pay it all off now, depending on the callable feature. So I get we're going to draw down on it, but on one hand, on the general fund, we're cool running super lean, but we're happy running 2 years worth of revenue sitting in the EDC fund. Just doesn't make sense.
Well, as I recall, and you may recall too, that we in the EDC board had wanted to build up cash also towards reducing debt when it was callable. So we can go back to that.
Does that complete your questions? Okay. Just a thought, if reports continue that seem to be increasingly publicized, that water shortage around the world is increasing, particularly in South Africa and some places even in Texas. The future might be, the question being raised is not what's the price of your water, but do you have water? And that's one of the things that we've been trying to bank as a city. We have something about possible resource of about 54 million gallons per day, and from different and multiple sources. So it's something we need to keep in mind, that water in the future may be a lot more precious than a lot of other services and possessions that we have. Moving, ready for the 5-year capital now?
So we've got the CIP, and Robert will bring us home on that. You've seen this in different forms a couple times, so Mr. Upton will speak briskly.
I can say good afternoon, Council. I'm Robert Upton, Director of Engineering and Capital Projects, and we'll briefly go over the 5-year CIP. As City Manager Pearson stated, you'd seen in bits and pieces over time. So a little bit quick education real quick on what is capital improvement. It's new construction. This is major non-routine. This will be brand new roads, greenfield projects, brand new buildings, improvements to current infrastructure is another one. This is to rehab and extend the life. It's also a long life expectancy, so it's not a maintenance, but it's a long term. This is usually greater than the life of the bonds that are issued. And this gives us, includes all things that are done for a capital project: land acquisition, design, procurement, construction, and closeout. As you can tell, we're projecting over the next 5 years. Our 5-year CIP is about $676 million, broken among the 5 major components of water, sewer, streets, parks, facilities, and drainage. A big component of that, over half of that is in the water and sewer fund. Fund resources across the needed projects relate from water sewer revenue bonds. The proposed new general obligation bonds or voter approved bonds in the amount of $124,000 is the planned bond issuance for 2019. And then continuing on through that, as you see some of the TERS reimbursement system items associated with cash and existing general obligation bonds were from the 2007 bond package. This breaks down further associated with that in the 5-year CIP based on those general fund projects and funds, and also enterprise funds. Based here is a 5-year projection for $153 million for 2019. That is what you'd be approving in the budget. The remaining 4 years after that are set aside as planning and forecasting, and may change from year to year based on priorities. First projects that we'll take a look at are drainage. What we have in here, these are set aside projects in that area, and I will head over here to a brief look through on the breakdown by those. As you can tell, we have highlighted in there is projects that we would be proposing for the 2019 bond package. These are projects we identified, I'll say, as localized areas. We are still evaluating our master drainage program, and to be out later this calendar year. That'll then look towards affecting the 2020 capital improvement program. Parks is our next development group. And you can see here is that we have several parks that are in parks trails that are in construction. Those are, or in design, those are associated with our HGAC funding mechanism. So we have partnerships with those. We have 6 projects looking forward in the 2019 bond package. These are trails, also expansions of our parks, Independence Park and Hickory Slough. And then also in the green area that we have highlighted, those are ones that we've partnered with the TERS, where you've authorized us to go back to the TERS to ask for those projects to be included in that funding mechanism. Facilities, as you can tell, we've have facilities located throughout the city. These include taking a look at Fire Station 1 that's currently under construction, Fire Station 8 that's in design, and future Fire Station 7. In there also is several items in the 2019 bond package associated with fire training facilities, animal service shelter, and then of course the partnership with the TERS for the Shadow Creek Library and Fire Station number 8 for reimbursement. We'll head over to streets, and this is a brief map of activities along in the streets area. As you can tell, we'll have several streets that, and this will be 2 slides on these projects. We have several streets that are in construction. That'll be Old Alvin area. We like to keep those on to show until they're complete. We have activity going there. We'll be taking a look with our partnership with TxDOT through HGAC. That'll be McCard Road, Smith Ranch Road, Max Road, and also Hughes Ranch Road. Our next slide dealing with streets also shows a significant amount of projects that we have set aside for the 2019 bond package. Pearland Parkway, Hughes Ranch Road extension out to from Cullen Parkway to Stone, taking a look at the extension of Max Road as well. These are also being looked at with funding mechanisms with HGAC. And then of course, we have the TERS package associated as well, and these are sidewalk extensions, intersection improvements in the TERS 2 area. Now we'll be turning our attention to the enterprise fund, and you see that we have projects also throughout, taking a look, some within facilities and also some pipelines or transmission mains as well. These are projects that are currently planned for. As you'll note, there is a couple projects at the bottom that are set aside. Those are also oversizing that we'll be looking at with developers in the Massey Oaks area. And continuing on with facilities as we improve. This is going back and taking a look at rehab of our booster stations for water lines, and our storage tanks. Also taking a look at enhancing our water quality programming and moving forward with those. Next one will be our wastewater program. As was mentioned earlier, we do have several plants that will be coming up for expansion and also rehabilitation. Taking a look there, you'll see that Berry Rose and also JHEX Water Reclamation Facility, those are planned in a couple years to also be expanded due to growth and continuing in our expansion and rehabilitation of our lift station program. You'll see that here into this side, along with our sanitary sewer rehabilitation. This is to take care of our I&I, our older systems, so that we can tighten these up so we can remove and reduce infiltration and intrusion into the system. Again, this is a 5-year summary of the funding sources broken out by fiscal year. As we mentioned earlier, we talked about proposed new general obligation bonds associated with the 2019. We'll take the next couple slides. We'll be talking about operations and maintenance. Each of the projects, as they're built, has a future operation and maintenance cost. These are then developed by the specific development who will take care of and own the project when it's completed. And these are then programmed and forecasted into the respective departments' budgets. And this is our last slide for the summary of those O&M costs. And finally, for our fiscal year 2019, among those is that taking a look at $153 million for this fiscal year. And taking a look at the funding sources here, you will note a difference between the two. I know that question was asked last year as well, is that we have about $12 million cash on hand that was sold from previous bond issuance for those specific projects. And also for Fire Station number 7 in 2020, there's about $5 million, almost $6 million that'll be sold for that bond for that project in 2020. So that's the difference between these two. I'd like to spend just a minute talking about our future bond referendum. In 2007, we had that bond referendum that was done so we could enhance and improve all of our roads, in our rehab roads, or not rehab, build new roads, have facilities and parks, et cetera. We're looking to complete that with construction in 2020. That is our last project, which is Makawa Road. This project was and program was extended a little bit due to the recession that happened during that, but then also we were able to reallocate funds and partner with HGAC and TxDOT to extend and maximize that dollar. Then we'll be taking a look now and coming to you with a future bond referendum. During our April meeting, when we talked about this, we had about $184 million in projects that all of our departments had come up with, but it does not include master plans. Those master plans being Parks Master Plan, but also Master Drainage Plan that we're still working on. And part of the discussion and goal was to be able to try and have a reasonable 5-year type program for completion so we can issue the debt, move forward, and continue get those projects done quickly. So with that, the discussion was talked about to take a look at projects totaling about $120 million that are there, and we can take a look, and I have that list coming up. And then the plan is we're researching those right now, providing scopes and detailed cost estimates so that we can start planning to send that to the voters and present those in the 2019 timeframe. And so these projects are broken down into 4 different segments. First segment is a list of projects totaling about $76 million. The next 2 after that, working with the Hickory Slough area for drainage and also the Sportsplex, brings the total up to $90 million. And then adding the last 4 projects, which is Harkey, a fire training facility, those bring it up, the total up to $120 million. The remaining items that are below that are projects that we have that are what we call below the line, or look at that, that'll total up to $184 million for council to consider as well. Again, this does not include projects that would result from the Parks Master Plan or the Drainage Master Plan that we have, and potentially even the facilities assessment that we're working on developing. At this time, I'd like to turn this back over to Mr. McCarter to finish out with the multi-year forecast.
Thank you, sir. I will bring us home here by touching on the multi-year forecast and then opening it up for questions. Looking at the general fund side of the multi-year forecast, kind of how we do this on the revenue side, We have a 4% increase built in for sales tax, 3% on most other revenue, not all, things like fines and forfeitures and franchise fees. We bring that down a little bit just to control for that. And then the property tax revenue is driven by the valuation forecast. We talked about that a few times today, but that's the big caveat to all of this, that could change. On the expenditure side, we do build in a 2% cost of living adjustment, and then most of the O&M for CIP projects. On the staffing side, police and fire staffing kind of drives most of that that you'll see here. So looking at kind of revenues going up each year in the neighborhood of $2 to $3 million, kind of staying at that minimum policy amount. We do get a little bit of a buffer there in the 2 out years, winding up with $70,000 over in 2021. The tax rate, and this actually, I apologize, needs to be updated. That 2021 should be about a half a cent higher, just based on that updated projection we talked about today. But we do see that O&M rate going up in 2020 and then coming back down in 2021. Again, caveated on that taxable value growth coming from the taxable value in the city. The other component to this is this does not take into account any rollback calculations or effective tax rate calculations or any direction from council. So this is really for a reference from you guys only in terms of what the CIP equates to on an operational basis. I'm going to skip ahead one slide just to give some context. So we'll open it up for questions in a second, but we will be back here on the 20th. That's Monday night, regular meeting, to vote on the maximum tax rate and set the public hearing dates if needed for that tax rate. So keeping that in mind, we'll open it up for any questions, comments, wrap-up thoughts that would give us direction for that 20th meeting. Thank you.
Okay, let the council needs to probably fold the capital improvements and the other in with the last part about the bond issue and so forth. Start with Tony.
Thank you, Mayor. On the out years on slide 112, I'd like to at least have some discussion at some point on increasing our policy. I mean, if we don't start our policy, I mean, at least let's project or have a discussion about increasing our policy from over 2 months to something a little bit larger. Knowing we're not going to get there overnight, but I think we should be increasing our general fund balance. In terms of the bond program, all the projects are most of the projects are good and needed in my opinion, but I think a smaller bond going to be tough to figure out where to draw that line, but just from an execution standpoint, I think we need to look at a smaller bond. I guess finally, I know we've got next steps and then we've got public comments on the agenda. I'd like to reserve maybe a little bit of time for council input in case there are some public comments that we want to pick up and direct back towards staff. If we can do that after the public comment, Mayor.
Okay.
That's all I have.
I appreciate it. Perez?
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of questions on the CIP. Right now, we don't have anything on our drainage CIP that deals with Clear Creek. Are we not anticipating any local contributions to the federal project at this time?
At this time, we're not. The actual sponsors of that project is Harris County Flood Control, DD4, and Galveston County. So if there is, it comes to them first. We're in talking with DD4. There is discussion that there may not need to be a local match, and that a lot of the work we've done with DD4 over the past years along the Marys Creek corridor may be able to go as in-kind matching as well. So, with the $295 million allocated, right now we're not projecting that we'll have any kind of local match.
This will probably dovetail into the discussion we have later this year about the master drainage plan. But as we go into the next year's CIP, um, uh, uh, we're looking at the projects for, in next year's 5-year CIP discussion. It may be beneficial for us to, after we have the master drainage plan, look at are there projects that we can add on to the federal project where if we have a contractor on there as they're constructing, we have a regional facility or expansion of DL Smith or anything that we identify to add that on in the advanced years of the CIP so we can possibly see some savings. If we got a contractor that's out there dredging or clearing or doing improvements on Clear Creek and we can get them to dig a detention pond for us, it may be something worth exploring.
But we'll definitely look at those partnerships.
Okay. On this is a little bit further advanced, but since I don't see it on any of the CIP, I know that EDC is talking about the multi-sports indoor facility. Are we looking at funding that outside of the CIP? Are we looking at as that be a complete public-private partnership? Are we looking at that being, how are we projecting our contribution to any construction of that? Or are we just not far enough along to know where that would need to come from?
I don't know, we're not really that far along in it right now, and we're going to be talking to the board about it here coming in 2 weeks. But I would assume that would be a PEDC funded project when a public-private partnership is what we've always assumed.
Is it, if depending on location, is that possibly a qualifier for as a TERS project or TERS funded project?
I don't know after we've gone through the TERS projects if we'd be able to add more. I suppose it would all just depend on the strength of the TERS over time, but that obviously wasn't one of the projects that we had in there as the list that you've been presented.
And I don't think we were prepared to add that, but it just something to think about, or a funding mechanism to think about, add that as that moves on, if that project happens to land inside the TERS boundary.
Could be.
The scope of the Pearland Parkway project, we are no longer looking at a super street, I presume.
Councilman Perez, the answer is we're looking at all options, but that is not on the priority because been removed down on the list partly because of taking a look at the new stoplight that's going to be going in on Pearland Parkway shortly, and then also taking a look at the stoplight that'll be installed between Berry Rose and the future roundabout.
And Pearland improvements is listed. It's completely independent of the improvements on the traffic circle. So there'd be, if one does not move forward, the other one can still persist. Correct?
That would be correct. We could still take a look at that moving forward because they are independent projects.
Following up with the kind of a line of thought that I had in the last discussion item. So Berry Rose, the Berry Rose treatment plant is required to be expanded because we've triggered the capacity, the 75% capacity already for that, or we're close to triggering it, and that's why we need to expand it. And if I remember correctly, the strategy is to close down Longwood, redirect all the flows to the expanded Berry Rose plant. Is that correct?
Councilman Perez, that is correct, is taking a look at being able to consolidate. Also following a little bit on TCEQ's guidance towards more regionalization as well within the cities.
So just again, with the line of question I had, where would we see savings in the maintenance if we consolidate to two treatment facilities and improve and update one? We'd have the capital expense, but would we save money? Would there be, not that necessarily these are driven off of a ROI since they're programmed by the state is the one we have to do that. But if we could have some idea of when, how we would see improvements on the water and sewer fund once with these things get consolidated and have to maintain less an older plant like the one on Longwood.
I think we'll see some small incremental, potentially cost reductions because it's consolidated in one plant, but we're still going to be treating that wastewater. And the real savings is in not having to expand the Longwood plant or a major rehab of the Longwood plant in the future. Because basically where it sits, an expansion would be extremely expensive, and a rehab would be expensive as well. So we've done several projects over the years to move those flows from there, and then we'll have one major project in the end to move those flows to Berry Rose. And just to clarify, I can't remember if you said or asked or said we're at the 75% at Berry Rose. We haven't reached that threshold at this point, but we've done the preliminary engineering, and so we're prepared to move into final design. So we've got that ready to go as we approach that with the growth of Riverstone Ranch.
Are we planning that, we're planning to let that project into design or into final design once we hit 75? We're going to do that preemptively.
We're looking to do that a little bit proactively. We know that those are the state thresholds, but as we experienced with the Reflection Bay plant, when you've got an area growing rapidly, it doesn't necessarily give you the amount of time you need to complete those expansions on time. And so with Riverstone Ranch continuing to grow and additional growth elsewhere in that basin, we just want to be ahead of it with the design so that we can move the construction forward when we get beyond that 75, but and start to approach that 90%, but before we get there to make sure we have it completed on time.
But strategically, we're not going to wait till 90 before we start the construction. The same way we're not going to wait till 75 before we start design, right?
That's correct. We'll be ahead of those triggers, those absolute triggers that TCEQ puts in place.
Okay. One other small question, I guess, logistically, Clay, for you. When we get into giving you direction as far as what the maximum tax rate should be, I know it seems as if everybody's in favor with sticking with effective, but do you think that there's benefit in giving some flexibility to have y'all explore maybe a 1% or a 2% increase over effective so that there's, as we go into vote and set the maximum tax rate, there's some flexibility underneath a 2% to make some adjustments without having to be locked into effective?
Far be it from me to give up some flexibility, but I think all things being equal for that, I think there's extra reporting requirements or advertising if you go beyond. And for the money to be involved, I just don't know that it'd be worth it. We can take a look at it, appreciate the question, but I think it's probably, we're already going up to 2.5 cents. That's balanced out by the values. But if I think it'd probably be best for all of us just to stick at the effective. But
I'm fine with the effective, but I just make sure that you don't, if you want to just have us stick at the effective, I'm comfortable with that. But that's our, I believe there's some limitations on once we set that maximum tax rate, we can't go over it.
that's absolutely true. But again, everything I've seen and we've been working on shows that what we get out of going beyond that a little bit just doesn't work. I mean, and the appraisal district's given us those calculations, so those are locked in too. So.
Okay. Do you think y'all need some more time to think about that before we
Well,
meet on?
we can, between now and the 20th, I mean, if something changes, I can come back and say, hey, we'll prep up the effective, but we suggest you adopt something different, so.
Okay. That's all I have, Mayor.
Okay, Councilor Hernandez?
The funds in here for the street reconstruction, does that have anything to do with the rating of the streets that we have currently and bringing us either back up to where we're currently rated or improving that rating in some way?
Effectively, no. These capital ones are mostly new work. I mean, there's might be something there, but it's not going to move the needle at all. It's still going to trend downward without the maintenance aspect, the short-term stuff.
Okay, so there's nothing in this proposal then that would affect that rating?
It'll give us more new streets. I guess it could on that side. We're going to add the mass of streets. So McCart will come in at a highest rating when it's new and go down from there.
Okay. The reason I asked that, there was a slide way back in the beginning that showed the difference in cost and maintenance, addressing these things now versus the future. I mean, is that something that can be included in this, or is that?
That's pretty fundamental. We don't want to pay 20 years for crack sealing and pavement leveling and those kinds of things by issuing debt. So the point of that slide was that we need to spend regular maintenance dollars to keep them out of a reconstruction, 20-year reconstruction.
Okay, so we're taking the debt to do the new stuff in order to open up some money for maintenance. Is that what you're saying?
No, they're really different pots of money. We've got the new construction pot, the capital debt stuff, and then we've got the operations and, we got a good program for the new, but we're short on the maintenance.
Okay, so this is purely for new construction, mobility, stuff like that.
Yep.
If I could just expand on that a little bit, we do have one project in the proposed 2019 bond program. That would be major recapitalization of concrete streets, which does have that 30-plus year life, similar to what we did in Regency Park, which would help, but on our pavement condition index. But it's we really need that infusion of about $4.5 million annually. That's going not only towards concrete streets but also towards our asphalt to just keep us where we are today. We would need approximately additional $7 million annually to start ticking that up, one PCI, one pavement condition index a year to get us moved back up. So it increases exponentially the longer we push off having that O&M side of it where we need it. We wouldn't spend capital dollars, CIP dollars on asphalt street rehab, reconditioning, rehabilitation, or anything like that, because the life of that, even when you do a complete reconstruction, is going to be 7 to 10 years before you're recapitalizing that.
I'd forgotten about that line. And another good example would be Linwood. We issued COs for that. That's a reconstruction, drainage, everything. So when it gets to that point, that's when you issue the debt and redo those.
Okay. And then we had a conversation, but just to refresh my memory on the ESDs coming forward, how long is it until we realize that return of what is it, roughly $1 million, just to kind of reincorporate that into the overall?
So I haven't had a chance to delve into that. I wouldn't expect we'll see money if that all comes to pass until our 2019-20 budget. Not this one, certainly, probably the one after that.
And then final question, just kind of a niche question, but on the animal services shelter money that's in here, as part of the proposed bond, is the reason that we can't go to no-kill more of a capacity issue, or is it more of a staffing issue? And is any of this money, can it be used toward realizing that goal at some point in the future?
I'll take a brief stab at that, if you will. It is about capacity. The facility that we have can only handle so many animals as they come in. And we do have our sergeant here that's our captain that's over animal control. He may want to jump in on this discussion, but it's about capacity. We keep them as long as we possibly can. We have numerous organizations that we work with that rescue those animals, but it's capacity.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Little?
Thank you, Mayor. Is there a slide or a page in the capital improvement project section that shows the accumulated debt over the 5 years? I looked through it. I didn't see one. I could have missed it. I left my readers at home. 71.
Look at that and get back.
So that $676 million, that includes current debt and the additional debt that will be added over the 5-year period?
You see that, John?
Yeah, so that's all the debt types, and it's important to keep in mind that not all of this is tax-supported debt. So obviously cash is cash. The certificates of obligation and the general obligations with the new proposed GO bonds and the TERS reimbursable debt, that component is going to hit your tax rate. And then the PEDC, obviously, that's Mr. Buchanan's group. And then really from there down is the water and sewer component of it. So that 667 is not all tax supported, and it's not all water and sewer. It's kind of a split of all those. But you can see the sum total by type on page 1 of the CIP there. Will give you an idea of how that's going to hit in future years.
Our current debt right now with both water and sewer is around 600 million. Is
So
that
the
right?
total water and sewer outstanding debt right now.
The entire city debt. About right, 600?
We, we got a slide. The general fund was like 300, the debt, so, and it probably makes sense. I mean, but they're completely, as you know, different legal functions, so we probably don't total those a lot.
Okay, so we're adding about $76 million of additional debt over the next 5 years.
76 million, where are you seeing that? I mean, the revenue bond piece is 227 million, that's the water and sewer side. Then the cash funding of 13 million, that's not debt, that's cash. And then the impact fee supported debt is another 103. So taking that 227 and that 103 would probably give you the whole water and sewer debt component of this CIP. That make sense?
On the other sources of funding of 50.5 million, is that federal and state matching funds, or what makes up that category?
That's the bulk of it. Which page are you on?
42, the top chart.
Slide 42.
Other funding sources, 50.5.
Is there anything the majority of that is matching funds. There's a few other cash balances from different funds, but almost all of it is matching funds.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Mayor.
Okay. Councilman Moore.
Thank you, Mayor. With the monies that we're awarded, the 290 mil for the Clear Creek project, is there any other cost outside of that money that was awarded to us that we plan to expend on that project?
So that money from the core, we won't see, it won't run through any of our books. There's a question whether it'll be a core lead or Harris County flood control. So we won't see any of that directly. And that
Will
was,
we contribute or spend any money on top of that?
you want to talk about the local match and land?
So as of right now, there's not typically in a core project, there is a local match, and that's a component of the overall core project. But the allocation should cover the entire project. And talking with DD4, who is actually a project sponsor on that, they do not expect that there ultimately will be a local match. If there were a local match, I think it would come from the local sponsors, of which we are not one of those. That doesn't mean that we couldn't use some of the improvements we've done over the years in the Marys Creek part of the Clear Creek watershed as in-kind matching funds. That would be our first attempt if there was any ask for matching funds.
Okay, thank you. I just didn't see anything mentioned in here, so I wasn't sure if we were having to make any.
All that money
expenditures.
is the Corps' money and potentially may go through flood control, but right now it's the Corps' money and the Corps' project.
Okay. One other question in reference to the page or slide 83, where it talks about the future bond referendum in reference to the Pearland Parkway traffic circle improvements. We've got allocated, I don't know if I'm reading that right, it's so small, 404,900,000, is that right? Almost
That is
5
correct,
mil.
Councilman Moore.
And what exactly are we going to do for that 500 million at the traffic circle? And is that something that absolutely needs to be done? And I'm not sure when this is projected on the list to be done. year-wise. But is that something that's detrimental, that has to be done in the 2019 bond, or is it something that can be pushed off longer?
That project will be set aside to create a true roundabout in there. It's a smaller circle that would go inside, and then we'd have direct fly-offs, or the roads that you currently take if you're on the outside traveling north on Pearland Parkway towards the Beltway would be a dedicated fly-off line that would not be impeded by the traffic that is coming on from the current circle, so that it would remove that conflict movement. We do get quite a few conflicts in there, accidents, et cetera, because of a yield not always being adhered to for the movement inside the circle having primacy. And so it is a need that needs to be addressed.
One of the drivers on the timing is when McCard Road goes through, our traffic projections show that we'll have a significant increase in traffic coming from the west, from McCard, along McCard into that traffic circle, which is probably the most difficult movement in that traffic circle, especially in PM peak.
Okay, thank you. And so that'll be done pretty much in conjunction with the McCard expansion, timeframe-wise?
That'll come down as we program as we program for the 5 years for that bond program. It could be in the first couple years. We would love to be able to have that coincide with McCard, but McCard is on its own schedule based on TxDOT and also funding mechanisms associated with that.
Okay.
Our witness?
I just wanted to follow up on Councilman Little. On that one slide, so the 5-year CIP uses and summary. If we did what was on there, as far as the uses of it, so the total on enterprise and general fund, $676 million, and that would be placed on top of the debt that we have now, total debt, or whatever we paid off between now and then.
John, is that the one he's talking about?
Yeah, that's the right slide.
Yeah, but that's the entire CIP. That's not all debt. And that includes for a number of the street projects, money that's already been authorized with the 07 bond issue, water and wastewater, same deals. So that's not all debt by any stretch. In fact, that's all the other sources, everything else, right? That's the entire CIP.
That's the entire CIP, and although it doesn't go out as far as our projections, our debt service projections we've shown do include everything in each of the years that we have that projection for. So
that's what I was going by, whether we do it or not, but if that's the projection that we're looking at, that between 19 and 2023, we would add another $676 million.
No, that's not right. That's the entire CIP, all funding sources, everything. Water, yeah, but it's not adding debt. That's not $700 million in debt.
Well, it doesn't make any difference if we're going to bond issue or we're going with COs, GOs.
No, it's not. It's not. That's everything. That's other people's money. That's the TxDOT shares. That's user fees from the. From the impact fees. That's not debt.
Money's got to come from somewhere, don't it?
I understand, but there's other sheets that show all the funding sources that is. So.
Okay. Well, that's not.
And even if it was, I mean, the debt that we are issuing is all projected. It's baked into the hundreds of millions for the water plant and the sewer plant are included in those projections that show that we can handle with a 0% this year, 5% next year, and best information we have right now, the 12 next year, the year after that. So, and the debt service and the ability to pay the assessed valuations growing up, we got $8 billion worth of valuation for the general obligation and CO debt. So,
Woody, if you go to the green binder under the 5-year CIP tab, page 1, it breaks out that 676, breaks that out into COs, GOs, kind of where it's coming from. That might Might help
That's the right
explain it.
sheet. So there's $58 million of PERS. About $15 or $16 million of cash. And then about $50 million of other funding sources, mostly TxDOT, and almost 13 million of bonds sold in prior years. So it's not all debt. It's
Okay.
It's
That's
got
what
us-
I was concerned about, because that, if, on top of the debt we have now, gets up to be a real number.
Does that complete your report?
You bet.
Let me have Clay to kind of summarize that and talk about the next step.
Well, 110 slides and a few hours later, we've gone through the entire city budget, all funds. It's as I started out, it's a big operation, and appreciate everybody's diligence towards that. We all are concerned and look at the revenue side, but what we get done for that's important. And so, we're delivering this, and this budget's going to is tight, but essentially a lot of it's locked in. There's not a lot of stuff on the fringes that we have, and so we've got a couple of follow-ups. I think not a huge amount, but we'll be ready for the 20th, and your decisions there. I think there is a public comment step, Mayor, when you're ready, but that's all I have.
That takes care of you. Okay, we have an item on our agenda called item 7, public comments. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to come to comment at this point? I see a finger, hand you up. Any public comments? Does any of the audience have anything? Any of the staff members have any questions or comments?
Better not.
Well, hearing none, I noticed it was awfully quiet there for a minute, so I'm gonna move down to item 4, which let me adjourn this facility. Thank all of you for being here. This is a very important process. You did a good job. Thank you for what you're doing. Have a nice weekend. We're adjourned at 12:40.